In this story, you'll meet Ana Valverde, an emergency room nurse who, after performing CPR on a man on the verge of death, discovers that the stranger is her own biological father. Join us for a tale of family secrets, lost letters, and the power of blood that unites life's deepest bonds. Don't forget to follow us and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our stories. Join us in listening to this story. Night fell mercilessly over the general hospital. In the emergency room, the soft hum of fluorescent lights contrasted with the urgency that permeated the halls. Nurse Ana Valverde, with her immaculate uniform and serene but attentive gaze, mentally reviewed the most advanced resuscitation techniques. Years of study and practice focused on a single goal: saving lives. Suddenly, the gate burst open, and two orderlies rushed in, pushing a stretcher containing an unconscious man. Their pale skin and blue lips made it clear that every second counted. Ana stepped forward, feeling her heart pounding with bated breath, adrenaline and duty mingling with every breath. "Get the CPR equipment and check for a pulse," she ordered firmly. A defibrillator, mask, and oxygen cylinder appeared in an instant. The nurse palpated the patient's neck. There was no sign of a pulse. Without hesitation, she began chest compressions at a steady pace, exactly in time with that song she'd heard thousands of times in training. With each push, Ana felt the weight of responsibility weighing heavily on her shoulders. The deathly silence of the room was only broken by the rhythmic sound of the time machine and the faint hum of the monitor recording her effort. Minutes that seemed like hours passed before, finally, a faint light signal appeared on the defibrillator screen, announcing the first heartbeat. A soft sigh escaped the nurse's lips, although she knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. "Prepare the central line and monitor vital signs," he shouted as he asked his colleagues for the necessary medications to stabilize him. The stretcher moved down the hallway toward the resuscitation room, where a full team of doctors was waiting. There, the man was connected to multiple devices. A blood sample was taken to determine his blood type, as his medical history indicated an unusual type. Everything had to fit perfectly to avoid adverse reactions during the transfusion. Upon discovering that her blood type was extraordinarily rare, the attending physician requested an urgent DNA test to confirm the donor's compatibility. Nurse Ana agreed, aware that every minute could mean the difference between life and death. The test tubes sped to the internal laboratory. Ana watched as the blue light from the incubator enveloped the samples. Each chemical reaction told a microscopic story that, minutes later, would reveal a secret capable of changing everything. As the test tube swirled in the incubator, my thoughts wandered to my own broken family. How could DNA possibly reveal unexpected ties? In the back of my mind, a burning question bubbled up. If that man could connect with someone of my blood, what ancient mystery lay hidden beneath layers of silence and distance? A lump in my throat warned me. This wouldn't be a routine report. Neither the signature, nor the initials in the manual, nor the legend in bold letters could prepare me for the explosion of emotions that followed. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure as the lab emptied and absolute silence demanded my attention. The doctor, with a grave expression, approached and, in a low voice, uttered the first words that paralyzed me. "Genetic match, possible direct relationship." My pulse, which had barely returned to normal, accelerated again. Could it be? A stranger I had just saved, and unknowingly, my own blood. The world seemed to stop. All the training, every book consulted, every night's practice took on a different meaning. In that instant, I realized that the life I had helped restore was the missing piece of my past, the missing link I had been searching for years. The silence in the recovery room became thick, almost palpable, like a veil covering an ancient secret. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears as the doctor held the report with trembling hands. The whitish fluorescent light reminded me that time continued, although for me, everything had been suspended in that revelatory instant. They had been critical moments. Every second of CPR, every dose of adrenaline administered, every machine reading, everything worked toward restoring a pulse that was now beating strongly. However, my heartbeat was beating for different reasons. The genetic coincidence wasn't a coincidence. This transcended science and plumbed unexpected emotional depths. DNA shows a 99.9% probability of kinship. I heard the doctor say, as if reciting a technical fact, but I felt the weight of each syllable. My hands, which had been applying compressions minutes before, began to sweat. I tried to maintain my composure, but a tremor ran through my fingers. How would I explain this? To my colleagues? To my own family? I saw myself, light years away, contemplating a blurry past, filled with gaps and omissions. A man on the verge of death, and unbeknownst to him, the father I never knew. In a brief respite, I was offered a towel to dry my forehead. I accepted, feeling every drop of sweat that reflected my inner turmoil and my tension. With every heartbeat, I was reminded that behind every life, there is someone who guides me. Meanwhile, the patient was slowly regaining color. His eyelids moved slowly, and after the first blink, a hint of confusion appeared in his eyes. As he recognized his surroundings, his eyes searched for familiar faces and then met mine. It was a clash of realities. Two strangers united by a thread of blood and a moment of shared life. "Where am I?" he murmured in a hoarse voice, still almost inaudible. "You're in the hospital," I replied softly. "They brought you in by ambulance. You had a cardiac arrest, but we managed to stabilize you." I watched his jaw tense and his eyebrows arch, as if he were trying to remember something. Every word he spoke echoed in my mind. The stranger I had saved hours before was trying to piece together his memory, unaware of the great mystery we both shared. They asked that the monitoring devices be temporarily removed so he could rest. The room fell into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the dim light from the hallway, and I was able to look at his face closely. Deep expression lines, gray hair at the temples and firm, yet fragile hands. The reflection of the empty stretcher was lost in my own eyes, which saw beyond the surface. Then I heard him mutter a word that chilled my blood. "Ana, my name." "But why?" His voice trembled, laden with something like surprise and recognition. My legs felt weak, the world spun, and for a moment, I thought any sound would be the prelude to a collapse. "You said my name," I managed to say with difficulty. "How do you know?" The man blinked again, and the silence became a bridge between two halves of an unfinished story. It was at that moment that I understood that the threads of destiny, woven by years of silence and distance, had been stretched taut to reveal themselves with a simple syllable. My voice was barely a whisper. "I need you to tell me who you are, and why you said my name." In the darkness of that room, I opened the door to a past I had thought impossible. A past that now pulsed before me. And there, on the brink of revelation, I understood that my life and that of that newly saved man were forever united, sealed by the same blood. And then, as the clock struck the end of one story and the beginning of another, I felt the night wind blow its breath through the crack in the window. The icy breeze slipped through the crack in the window and swept through the recovery room like an unexpected sigh. The man, still leaning against the headboard, was breathing harder than he had a few minutes earlier, but his eyes were still filled with confusion. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline rush and the DNA revelation. Forced myself to sit next to him and keep my voice steady. I picked up a glass of water from the side table and carefully handed it to him. He accepted it, drank slowly, and looked at me with a grateful, yet astonished expression. His voice came out hoarse as he tried to speak. "Thank you for saving my life, Ana." The sound of my name falling from his lips was like a distant echo bringing me back to reality. I tilted my head and offered him a small smile, trying to hide the turbulence in my chest. "No need to thank me," I whispered back. "Tell me, what's your name?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if to sort out his words, and then slowly opened them. "My name is Guillermo," he said, paused. "Guillermo Valverde." Hearing his last name, I felt a chill run down my spine. Valverde, my own last name. My gaze clouded as he watched me, confused by my reaction. "Valverde?" I stammered, leaning forward. "Are you sure that's what it says on your ID?" He nodded slowly. His voice, trembling, revealed the same disbelief I felt. "Yes, that's what it says. I came here tonight from the rural emergency clinic. They called me for the transfusion, because my blood type matches the sample they left here. I thought it was just another donation, but when they compared my information with the hospital records, they looked me up directly for this procedure. His words made sense in my mind. A blood type so rare that finding it required locating the only compatible donor. I felt his hand move toward my fingers, searching for an anchor in that sea of emotions. He continued, his voice breaking. Years ago, my wife and I had a daughter, but there were complications during delivery, and the hospital lost all trace of her. They told me she didn't survive, that there was nothing they could do. I could never forget her. Every word, every confession, resonated in my memory like a blow. My own childhood memories lacked moments before I was 7. I had been adopted by the Valverdes, and that story of a stepsister who died at birth was always a mystery shrouded in silence. I sat up a little, feeling my pulse quicken again. I wanted to ask him more, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stared at him, seeing in his face the same mixture of love and pain I'd carried inside me since I was a child. Then he exhaled sharply and looked into mine. Ana, could you assume a kinship with me? The question, so tempered yet so direct, made me close my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I felt a lump in my throat and a tear escape behind my eyelid. That warm light in the hallway seemed to illuminate not only the room, but also the truth we were both about to face. I think so, I managed to whisper in a shaky voice. Because I was looking for you too. And in that instant, amidst the darkness and the suppressed tension, I understood that the man I had saved from death not only shared my blood, but also the same broken history. And then, sighing, he repeated my name with a mixture of wonder and tenderness. Ana Valverde, and my world, which until a few hours ago was the hospital and its emergency room, exploded into a whirlwind of past and present upon hearing the phrase that sealed our truth. I am Guillermo Valverde. Guillermo's expression softened, filling with an indescribable tenderness as he said my name. For a moment, I knew that this man, exhausted and fragile after his unemployment, held in his hands not only my past, but also the will to heal old wounds. I never imagined I'd find you like this, he continued, his voice soft. I thought my daughter, well, my little girl was dead. The words fell through the air like a sharp blow. Adoption, orphanhood, disappearing mothers. Fragmented memories of my childhood came flooding back to me in a painful torrent. My adoptive mother always told me about a little sister who didn't survive, though she never explained further. That official version, sculpted in silence and averted glances, crumbled in an instant. I took a deep breath, holding on to the edge of the stretcher to keep from collapsing. Guillermo, I said, my voice trembling. I need to understand everything. How did I know about you? How did I end up in this hospital without knowing your name? And why do you know mine? He looked down, his hands shaking. Then he looked up and offered me a half-smile, laced with melancholy. My wife passed away 5 years ago. Before she died, she gave me some letters, he began to explain. She warned me that if I was ever alone, I should know your origins. She gave me your name, Ana Valverde. She said you were her daughter, although I never knew anything about you until one night I received that posthumous letter with one last request. Take care of Ana. But I didn't understand. How could I take care of her if I didn't know anything about her? The revelation shook me. Since I was a child, I'd felt a void I tried to fill with books and friendships, but never with answers. My real biological mother, the one who gave me life, had sent messages I never received. They were withheld, lost, perhaps never arrived. Pain mingled with guilt over my own doubts. Would this story have happened if it weren't for this medical emergency? Do you have those letters? I asked, trying to control the lump in my throat. He nodded and carefully removed 3 yellowish envelopes from a plastic folder. My fingers trembled as I touched them. When I opened the first one, I found his delicate, firm handwriting. My dear Ana, if you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer here, but I must tell you things that your father and I hid to protect you. The words seemed to whisper an ancient secret to me. Reading the second letter, her story emerged clearly. An unexpected pregnancy, the social and economic pressures of the time, and the painful decision to give me up for adoption to the Valverdes for my well-being. The third, dated just a week before her death, included a photograph. A young woman with soft features and deep eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. The same blanket that, during my childhood, the adoptive family had kept. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at that picture. For decades, I'd wondered if he looked like me. That night, the answer lit up on the paper. I inherited the same upper lip shape, the same curve in my eyebrows, even the same tiny mole on my left cheek. She loved me more than I imagined. I whispered, moved. And you loved me in silence too. Guillermo held my hand tightly, as if he was afraid I might faint if he stopped. This DNA allowed me to find you, he said. But now I want to know you, to share with you what we lost. I want to be your father. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. A distant voice announced the change of guard. The hospital continued its frenetic pace, indifferent to the story that had just been born in that room. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when I opened them, I saw Guillermo waiting for me, hopeful. Dad, I said, my voice faint. I never imagined I'd save your life to find you. He smiled with nostalgia and relief. Then, a high-pitched beep disrupted the moment. The alarm on one of the monitors went off, indicating a sudden change in the vital signs of a patient in the adjacent room. Guillermo frowned. His hand squeezed mine for a second longer, and without letting go, he said, I promise we'll talk about all this very soon. But now, I must attend to that urgent matter. And with the same determination with which I'd been forced to revive him just a few hours earlier, he stood up to face the new call. The echo of his footsteps mingled with the murmur of nurses and doctors arriving on the scene. I stood there, clutching the cards, feeling the early morning wind blowing harder. My world had been divided into a before and an after, since that luminous signal in the lab revealed our bond. Now, every beat of my heart resonated with the will to live not only as a nurse, but also as a daughter. I closed the door softly behind him, and as he walked into the hallway, I felt like this new life was just beginning. The next day, the sun streamed through the large windows of a hospital wing, tinting the white walls a golden hue. The constant murmur of footsteps, beeps, and conversations mingled with the smell of antiseptic and reheated coffee. I felt strange, as if crossing the threshold of my shift was like crossing into two different lives. The one before I met my biological father, and the one after, when everything took on a new meaning. As I put on my gown for my morning rounds, I incorporated a small framed portrait from those letters into my uniform. The blurred image of my biological mother holding the baby that was me. Every line of her face felt simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar, like a distant echo finally finding its source. I kept the photograph next to my nursing ID, behind its clear plastic sleeve, as if keeping it close would give me the strength to face each step. Before starting, I found a quiet spot in the break room. My notes were spread out on the table. Guillermo's name, the patient's information, who was now being transferred to another department after stabilizing. I took out the second letter, the one that described the reasons for the adoption. An unplanned pregnancy in a hostile environment, family pressure, and the promises of my adoptive parents, the Valverdes, who offered a well-funded home. I read carefully. I know my decision left you with unanswered questions, but believe me, my love for you was stronger than my fears. Sometimes, protecting means pushing away. Each paragraph resonated like a belated confession. I closed my eyes and saw my mother. A shadow at the end of a hallway, a goodbye I'd never heard. My fingers ran over the trembling handwriting, heavy with regret and tenderness. I felt a lump in my throat. To understand her words was to accept a wound and, at the same time, to heal it. Suddenly, a notification rang on my phone. It was a text message from my on-call supervisor. Ana, Dr. Serrano needs a progress report on the Valverde case before 10 o'clock. Stop by his office. My pulse quickened. I had to submit a clinical report and a summary of the transfusion, as well as the DNA results, but I also had to prepare for what this would mean for my personal life. I put the letter in my bag, along with the portrait, and sighed. The line between my duty and my story had just blurred. In Dr. Serrano's office, I reviewed vital signs, medication changes, and potential complications. I spoke professionally, but my mind kept returning to the handwriting and face of my real father. As I handed over the report, he looked at me curiously. "Good work, Ana," he said. "I see the patient is doing well. Anything else clinically?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Nothing else, doctor. Everything's under control." When I stepped outside, the hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel of opportunities and fears. I decided to take advantage of the brief break to call the Valverdes, my adoptive parents. On the other end of the line, their warm voice was pleased to hear me. "How have things been?" my adoptive mother asked in her sweet tone. I wanted to confess everything. The letters finding my father, the vertigo of discovering my roots. But in the end, I just said, "One day at a time." It's been intense, but I want you all to know that I appreciate everything. My adoptive father added, "We're proud of you, daughter. You define your path." I hung up feeling filled with gratitude and a torn heart. I had two families now, two homes, two stories to weave together. But before merging these universes, I had to learn every detail. Names, dates, memories my biological mother mentioned as if she were still alive, trusts and broken promises awaiting redemption. Upon returning to the recovery room, I stopped at the nurse's desk. On it, a red folder labeled Valverde Family Secret reminded me how protected my identity had been. I opened it carefully and saw my old adoption file. Dates, signatures, brief notes from a social worker. Nothing about my biological mother's whereabouts. It was then I knew that, to piece together my complete story, Guillermo's letters wouldn't be enough. I had to dig deeper, ask more questions. As I clutched the file to my chest, the call center buzzer rang. A new code blue, an ICU arrest. The nurse's heart spun like an hourglass. Every ounce of urgency counted. I left the papers and confessions behind and grabbed my gear. Running, I crossed the hallway, feeling the two realities converge. I had to care for another patient, without neglecting the father I was just getting to know. And there, in that instant, I understood that life continued to demand my duty and my truth at the same time. My personal and professional history, united by blood and emergencies, had become a single desperate heartbeat. The code blue resounded like a trombone. The end of this page, and the beginning of another, even deeper search. The ICU door swung open as I ran inside. The hallway was packed with nurses and doctors rushing through, working on monitors, reviewing charts, and administering medications. Shouts of "Code Blue in Room 14" echoed like a drum, and panic filled the air. Without a second thought, I grabbed my emergency kit and launched myself down the hill. My breathing quickened, but my mind remained cool and precise. I knew that cardiac arrest only provided a very brief window of time before irreversible neurological damage occurred. I entered the room and saw a middle-aged man on the stretcher, surrounded by resuscitation equipment. With a gesture, I stopped the doctor's compressions and took his place. I placed my hands on the patient's sternum and began counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, beating the rhythm firmly. The routine of years of practice helped me maintain the cadence. As I pushed, I remembered the discovery of my biological father and the bond that was forged between us. But in that moment, it all came down to the heartbeat in front of me. A nurse prepared the defibrillator. I indicated the position of the pads and waited for the exact moment. "Synchronized at 200 joules," I ordered. I pressed the button, and that blue beam of energy pierced his chest. The monitor showed returned voltage, and the patient coughed sharply, his eyes searching for familiar faces. I stroked his arm. "You've won another day," I said firmly. Adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and my pulse, though controlled, danced with the excitement of saving a life. I felt the palms of my hands damp inside the gloves, soaked with antiseptic. The cold bezel of the defibrillator had left a slight tingling in my fingers. The anesthesiologist smiled, and my heart rate stabilized. My gaze searched for Guillermo, who was proudly watching me from the doorway. However, an urgent beep altered the atmosphere. The blood pressure was dropping again. The anesthesiologist adjusted the vasoactive drugs, and the head physician instructed, Immediate intubation, sedation, and a clear airway. I ran to the intubation cart, took the cannula, and looked at the patient with determination. Ketamine, and I use a laryngoscope in 30 seconds. 10 seconds later, I opened the man's mouth, shone the light, and carefully inserted the endotracheal tube. Air re-entered his lungs. I switched on manual ventilation, and the team adjusted the ventilator. Airway secured. Monitor stable. I reported, taking note of the data. Guillermo approached me and extended his hand, his eyes shining. We shared a brief moment of silence, aware that this triumph united our professional and personal lives. The supervisor on duty instructed me to resume my rounds. I put away my briefcase, grabbed my flashlight, and walked away. As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor, and each breath recalled the passage from the cold corridor to the warmth of my new reality. My mind replayed Guillermo's serene face and the letters from my biological mother, wondering how many encounters the future held. Every step echoed in my head like an echo of unanswered questions. The cold of the corridor contrasted with the warmth of emotion in my chest. My mind reviewed every detail. The message from my father, the letters from my biological mother, the promise of a new shared future. I knew that behind that door, beyond the hallway, new truths awaited, painful, yet deeply liberating. With my pulse racing and my gaze fixed, I prepared to discover what he needed to tell me. I entered the adjoining room and found Guillermo, unrecognizable without the gown he'd been wearing for hours under his hospital gown, sitting at the foot of a stretcher. His eyes remained fixed on the monitor, both focused and filled with emotion. Noticing my arrival, he stood up with difficulty, dropping his folder of letters on a nearby chair. "Ana," he murmured softly. "Thank you for coming." I slipped through the bustle of nurses and technicians, quickly checking the vitals on the screen. The intubated patient's heart rate was stable, and his blood pressure was within acceptable limits. I nodded to the anesthesiologist. "The pressure is holding. We can gradually withdraw sedation according to protocol." He adjusted the infusion pumps and gave me an approving look. I turned my attention to Guillermo, whose eyes oozed gratitude and a hint of vulnerability. "It was a very serious strike," I commented quietly, "but we've got the situation under control. How are you feeling?" Guillermo rubbed his hands together, rubbing them as if to dispel the emotional chill that gripped him. "I'm alive," he replied with a half-smile. "Seeing you care for others reinforces what I've always suspected. You're extraordinary." A light blush rose to my cheeks. Professional pride tried to surface, but my heart was beating faster for something deeper. "We're a team, Dad," I said without thinking. The word Dad slipped from my lips without warning. I saw his eyes water, his chest rise with a pent-up sigh. "Dad," she repeated, almost like a prayer. "I've longed for this moment." Before I could respond, the intercom sounded urgently. My on-call supervisor was summoning me to trauma for a multiple accident case. I looked at my watch. 10 minutes until the scheduled follow-up visit for another critical case. "Sorry, I have to go," I said, standing up. "But I'll expect you at the cafeteria at 2 o'clock, if my schedule doesn't get complicated." William nodded solemnly, sliding the folder into his lap. "I'll be there," he promised. "Don't miss it." I hurried out, my briefcase thumping against the side as I ran. As I ran down the hallway, I mentally replayed the events. The recovered heartbeat of a stranger, the DNA report, the letters from my biological mother. Each fragment came together in a mosaic that was just beginning to form. Upon entering the trauma unit, a young woman with a fractured tibia and a boy with burns on both hands greeted me with expressions of pain. My training took over. I cleaned wounds, administered pain relief, coordinated X-rays. Every life I touched reminded me of the miracle of a second heartbeat and the certainty that, sometimes, saving a life also means rescuing a past. After stabilizing my patients, I headed to the large window overlooking the main lobby. Through the glass, I could see the cafeteria and the table where Guillermo was waiting, the yellowed menus spread out before him. The clock read 1:45. 5 minutes to face the story that awaited us. I took a deep breath, replaying my biological mother's words in my mind. Protect Ana. Now I knew that protection also meant being with her, telling her everything, my heart overflowing with emotion. I turned and headed toward the cafeteria door, ready to uncover the secrets that remained untold. The ticking of the clock in the cafeteria seemed to accompany my steps as I pushed open the glass door. Upon entering, I was surprised by the unusual calm of the place. Only a handful of nurses were sipping coffee alongside doctors on duty, and at a secluded table, under the dim light of a hanging lamp, I saw Guillermo distractedly flipping through the yellowed menus. I paused for a few seconds at the edge of the doorframe, took a deep breath, and stepped firmly across the threshold. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for waiting for me." He looked up and smiled at me with that mixture of pride and tenderness that, since yesterday, has left me with a lump in my throat. The plastic folder showed the 3 letters and a small object wrapped in a linen handkerchief. Seeing me, Guillermo slid the folder to the center of the table and carefully moved the handkerchief aside. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting," he said, straightening his jacket. "I wanted to make sure you had some hot coffee." I acknowledged the gesture with a smile and sat down across from him. The aroma of freshly brewed espresso comforted me, although my mind was focused on that handkerchief that seemed to conceal something of great value. I picked up one of the letters and mentally reviewed my biological mother's handwriting. Each stroke evoked a story of sacrifice and love that was beginning to make sense. "Do you want me to start with the first letter?" I asked, turning the paper over in my fingers. William nodded gently and urged me to continue. "My dear Ana, for years I've dreamed of the day you could read these words." I read aloud, my voice trembling as I recalled her past voice. "She describes how she had to leave after your birth, how she lived tormented by guilt and gratitude for knowing you were in a safe home. She speaks of a shelter in a town called Valle Verde, where she left an old piece of furniture with your first diapers and a locket with the initials AA. The name Valle Verde echoed in my mind. Was it a symbol or a real place? I looked at Guillermo, searching his eyes for confirmation. "That town exists," he murmured. "It's 2 hours from here. My research led me there a month ago, but I didn't know if you were ready to see it." My thoughts raced. A small trunk in a country house, a rusty medallion, memories I never experienced, notes from a life cut short. I hugged the letter tightly and leaned back in my chair. "I didn't know anything about that," I confessed. "No one ever told me about Valle Verde or that medallion." Guillermo placed his hand on mine and squeezed gently. "Your mother wanted you to have all the pieces of this puzzle. That's why she wrote. And now that we're together, I want to give them back to you." I felt a lump in my throat prevent me from speaking. We had gone from strangers to father and daughter in a span of hours, and the pieces of my identity were suddenly emerging to reconstruct me. I took a deep breath, and when I looked back, Guillermo was holding out the handkerchief. "Here it is," he said. "It's not much, but it's the only thing I found next to Grandma Martinez's dresser in Valle Verde." Carefully, I unwrapped the linen and found an antique, circular medallion with the initials AA engraved on its rust-coated surface. Holding it, I felt the weight of the past, cold, firm, real. I held the medallion up to the light on the table and saw that its design depicted 2 intertwined laurel branches, a symbol of victory and rebirth. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Do you think the box of diapers is still there?" He tilted his head thoughtfully. "The house has been closed for years, but I'm hopeful the new tenants will cooperate. Sometimes the memory of a place lives on in forgotten objects." A chill ran down my spine. I imagined that dusty piece of furniture in a shadowy corner, the ashes of my story waiting to be discovered. I slipped the medallion into my robe pocket, careful not to scratch it, and sat up. "We have to go to Valle Verde," I exclaimed with determination. Guillermo nodded with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "First thing tomorrow morning." I spoke with the lady at the village registry office. "She'll let us into the house if we show her your documents." I nodded again, knowing that along with that medallion would come another journey. One into my mother's past, into the story before my adoption, and into the truth that would define my future. A faint creaking sound was heard behind the bar. The curious glance of a nurse, the clinking of spoons against ceramic cups. The murmur of the cafeteria seemed to diminish to a whisper, as if the silence awaited the moment of our words. I sighed, smoothing the letter sheet gently, and looked at William. "I'm going to read the third letter tonight," I announced quietly. "I think this is just the beginning." He smiled at me tenderly and said, "And I will be with you every step of the way." I opened the folder, ready to turn the page, but before I did, he raised his hand and asked, "Ana, are you ready to know what your mother wrote the night before she died?" My heart pounded. With a lump in my throat, I nodded, and as I followed his gaze to the final letter, I knew that tomorrow's dawn would no longer be enough to contain my search for my truth. And in that moment, on the verge of discovering my mother's last wishes, I felt that the end of this page marked the beginning of a journey that would change everything I thought I knew. The dim light from my desk barely illuminated the break room. Outside, the bustle of the hospital was muffled by the thick windows, and in the silence I found the space to face the third and final letter. I held it in both hands, as if its touch could convey my mother's voice, that presence I had known until now only through her handwriting. "My beloved Ana, if you're reading this, it means I've passed away, but I don't want you to leave without the whole truth. It's not enough to know about your father or to wear a medallion. You must also know my story, my secrets, my fears, and my hopes. I want you to understand why I left you. There's a place I hold dear to my heart. The old house by the stream, in Valle Verde, at the edge of the lavender field. I grew up there, with my parents and my younger sister, who died when I was 15. That tragedy forged in me the impulse to flee, to build a different tomorrow. Yet it was in that same house that I held you in my arms for the first time. One summer day, in the warmth of the sun, surrounded by wild violets. That day, I felt like the world had stopped when I first saw you. All I could remember was the image of your sleeping smile and the tiny beat of your little heart. But fear came later. Some men connected to my in-laws threatened to claim you, wanting me to give up your care. I wasn't strong, my child. I was alone facing an uncertain future. I decided to give you up for adoption to give you the chance to live without chains. I couldn't bear to watch you grow up surrounded by anguish. So I wrote those letters hoping that one day, when you crossed the threshold of your life, you would learn this part of your story. You will find, along these lines, a handmade map and an antique key. The key opens the cedar trunk in the attic of the house. There I kept your first blanket, a handkerchief embroidered with my initials, and a small locket with a photograph I never knew I could develop. I ask that, when you approach the house, you knock 3 times on the front door and say my name. Mariana Alvarado. Only then will the heart of the house allow you to enter. The spirit of your grandmother protects the place for those who carry my blood. Inside you will also find a journal of my thoughts, an intimate account of the days I lived without you and the dreams I always kept for you. With all my love, M. As I reached the end, my pulse pounded. The signature, barely a shaky stroke, echoed the memory of a woman who for 15 years had harbored an unspeakable desire to find me again. I closed my eyes and let out a breath, aware that those instructions were more than a script. They were the key to unlocking my past and reconciling it with my present. I looked at the sheet of paper. The sketch of a map, with curved lines simulating the stream bed and small symbols indicating landmarks. An old oak tree, a stone well, the iron gate. It all evoked a scene from my earliest childhood. A memory I'd barely been able to daydream about. The key, cold in the palm of my hand, seemed to whisper ancient stories to me. I felt its weight and roughness against the worn metal. I knew it was the same one my mother held when she decided to leave me in the Valverde's care. Without it, the medallion would have seemed like a mere ornament. With it, it was the promise of opening a chest full of voices and secrets. The words "knock 3 times" echoed in my mind like a spell. Would I be able to pronounce the name Mariana Alvarado without hesitation? What would I find on the other side of the door? The night seemed to shroud every gesture, every shadow that danced on the walls in mystery. I put the letter and map in my bag along with the key, clutching them tightly. I knew that, at dawn, I would begin the journey to Valle Verde. But first, I had to face my own fears. The fear of discovering that the house was no longer the same, that the memories had faded, or that the trunk had been ransacked. I got up and looked out the window. The hospital lights flickered, steady against the night. Up there, I felt the protective gaze of an absent mother and the steady breath of a newly found father. With my heart burning and the map spread out on my desk, I exhaled a long breath. Across town, Guillermo was also preparing, probably reviewing the names he needed to mention when he arrived at the municipal registry. I closed the door softly, allowing the echo of my footsteps to fill the room. Tomorrow, when I knock 3 times, I will pronounce the name my blood dictated to me. Mariana Alvarado. And in that instant, on the brink of an adventure I had never imagined, I knew that the end of this page marked the threshold of a new destination. The journey to Valle Verde, where the rubble of a hidden past and the hope of a definitive reunion lie. The alarm clock rang at 5 a.m., and the room fell into darkness, barely illuminated by the faint light filtering through the curtains. I sat up slowly, my heart still beating to the rhythm of last night's revelation. The map spread out on my pillow, and the antique key reminded me that today I would embark on a journey that would change my life. I dressed in comfortable clothes, worn jeans, a white t-shirt, and my light jacket. I put the medallion with the initials AA in my pants pocket. Inside the jacket, the envelope containing my mother's letter. I locked the room and went down the hallway so as not to wake anyone. The adoptive home, silent at that hour, reminded me that my story was beginning to be written outside its familiar walls. In Guillermo's car, parked in the garage at that hour, the engine purred softly as it started. The morning air was thick with dew. As we passed through the countryside, the smell of damp grass awakened my senses. Guillermo drove with his eyes fixed on the road that wound toward Valle Verde. I mentally reviewed the map. The stream, the 100-year-old oak tree, the stone well, and at the end of the dirt road, the wrought iron gate. At dawn, the first rays of sunlight lit up the lavender fields that flanked the road, dyeing the horizon mauve. Valle Verde emerged like an impressionist painting. A whisper of perfume floated in the air, almost magical. Guillermo slowed down as he crossed under the town's welcome arch. A carved wooden sign proclaimed, "Welcome to Valle Verde." A few lazy cats slithered between pots of geraniums, and in the distance I heard the ringing of a church bell. We stopped in front of the house indicated on the map. It was a gray stone building with red tiles and vines covering part of the facade. The main door, made of solid wood, was flanked by 2 stone columns. A small metal plaque bore the text, "Alvarado Family Home." The garden gate creaked under our hands as we pushed it, and a pebble path led us to the portico. I took a deep breath and took the key out of my inside jacket pocket. After examining the ornate lock, I spoke softly but firmly. "Mariana Alvarado. Mariana Alvarado. Mariana Alvarado." The echo of my own voice resounded in the hall. I heard a sharp click as the key turned. The door gave way. The threshold smelled of old wood and dried flowers. Guillermo put his arm around my shoulders as we slowly entered. The brick floor still bore the pattern of intertwined clovers, and against the wall were several dusty leather boots and an old rocking chair. We advanced toward the spiral staircase that led up to the attic. Each wooden step emitted a faint groan under our weight. Above, the space was covered with beams and planks that revealed a glimpse of the ceiling. Boxes were stacked, furniture wrapped in yellow sheets, and dust hung in shafts of light that filtered through the small windows. I located the old cedar trunk, just as the map indicated, against the north wall. It had dull brass fittings and a rusty padlock. I took the locket key out of my pocket and, with trembling hands, inserted it into the lock. As I turned the keyhole, a metallic creak confirmed the opening. I took a breath and lifted the trunk lid. I lifted the lid of the trunk, and a faint scent of ancient dust and cedar filled the air. Inside, carefully folded, lay several objects wrapped in cloth. An ivory wool blanket, still soft to the touch, a handkerchief embroidered with the initials M.A., and a tiny silver locket darkened by age. My trembling fingers first rested on the blanket, remembering my mother's words. "Your first blanket." I felt its soft texture as I held it against my cheek. Next, I took out the embroidered handkerchief. As I unfolded it, I noticed a careful embroidery of gold threads forming the silhouette of a heart. On the back was a note. To my Ana, the tears you shed in secret and the dreams you still hold. Those words resonated in my chest like a distant heartbeat. I leaned forward to read them again, and felt a mixture of gratitude and nostalgia wash over me. Then, with extreme caution, I opened the locket. Inside, I found a tiny black and white photograph. Two young women, one older with a serene face and the other pregnant, tenderly resting her hand on her belly. Beneath the image, I read, Mariana and your sister. My heart leaped. I searched my memory for the existence of that younger sister. My mother mentioned a tragedy, but I never imagined this visual connection. Guillermo, beside me, gazed at the objects with equal awe. He placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Each piece is a story waiting to be discovered." I nodded, aware that these objects were fragments of intersecting lives, of protective memories and perpetuated silences. I placed the treasures on the trunk lid and moved the dusty boxes aside to find a leather journal, tied with a frayed ribbon. I undid the ribbon and opened the cover. The first page displayed delicate handwriting. Mariana Alvarado's diary. The opening lines spoke of a bright summer, the arrival of a baby, and the promise to always protect her. Each word resonated with my mother's voice, describing games under the oak tree and secrets shared on the terrace. As I read, I felt the weight of so many years of silence begin to fade. These pages revealed her inner struggle, her fears, and her decision to give me up for adoption. One fragment stopped me in my tracks. If one day my presence is missing, look in these lines for the echo of my love. Do not fear, my daughter, for I will always be with you. I carefully closed the diary and hugged it to my chest. A burst of light pierced the window, illuminating the dust in the air. The silence of the attic was broken only by the slight creaking of the beams. I looked at Guillermo with gratitude and determination. The trunk, now empty of enigmas, gave way to answers. In this diary, the voices that had once been silenced would live on. "We have a lot to read," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But first, we must photograph every page and care for these objects like the treasures they are." Guillermo nodded and took out his phone to document everything. I closed the trunk, leaving behind the echo of a past protected in the cedar wood. I put the key in my jacket pocket, feeling its metallic coldness. I took a deep breath. The journey back to reality was approaching, but now I carried with me the testimony of a mother who had loved me more than I imagined. As I descended the stairs, the trunk was left behind, but its promise hung in the air. Every creak of the wood beneath my boots reminded me that life awaited me. The hospital, my patients, and my adoptive family. Yet, deep inside, the echo of that attic would resonate forever, marking the beginning of the reconstruction of my own story. As I crossed the threshold, the dust from the attic was left behind, but its echo would linger with every step. Outside, the twilight tinged the rooftops of Valle Verde orange. I knew that upon returning to the hospital, every word would be a reminder of who I am. The journey had begun. There would be no turning back. As I descended the attic stairs, the echo of my footsteps among the beams mingled with the beating of my own heart. The dust floating in the afternoon light seemed to dance around me, as if celebrating the discovery of the secrets kept beneath that wooden deck. With each step, the cedar trunk fell further behind, though its memory traveled with me, wrapped in the locket, handkerchief, and diary that now rested against my chest. We left the house in silence. Dusk had tinged the rooftops orange, and the hanging flowers on the porch seemed to say goodbye with a whisper. Guillermo carefully closed the front door, placing the palm of his hand on the wood. I approached and, before turning the key, placed my own hand next to his, feeling the pulse of the past vibrate beneath the cracked paint. For a moment, the world stopped. The warmth of the stone, the distant song of a night bird, the murmur of the brook barely audible below. "Thank you for being with me," I whispered, not daring to say. "Thank you for giving me my life back." He smiled at me and shook my hand tenderly. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "This trip is as much yours as it is mine." The car was waiting for us next to the old rosebush that covered part of the facade. As we got in, The cool evening breeze filled the cabin, and the engine started with its usual soft murmur. In the rear-view mirror, the silhouette of the Alvarado house faded into shadows, leaving behind the amalgam of secrets that now formed the mosaic of my story. On the way back, the silence became a blank canvas where everyone expressed their thoughts. I adjusted the side mirror and looked at the medallion around my neck, resting under my shirt like a brand-new amulet. The reflection of the light on the rusty metal reminded me of my mother's promise. "I'll always be with you." I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, as if releasing a sigh that had been trapped inside me for years. The winding, uneven road forced me to focus on the steering wheel, but my tireless mind reviewed every word in the diary, every fold of the blanket, and every petal of the lavender we'd passed through. What would my life be like from now on? How would these newly discovered fragments fit with the memories of my childhood with the Valverdes? Without even realizing it, my pulse mingled with the clatter of the tires on the asphalt. When I arrived at the hospital, the parking lot lights greeted me with a new familiarity. Those lamps shone the same as every morning, but today I saw them with new eyes. I carefully picked up my briefcase. Inside I kept my work tools, but in my bag I also carried the locket, the blanket, and the handkerchief. I closed the car door and paused for a few seconds, as if gathering the courage to enter a world that now seemed alien and at the same time intimately my own. The hum of fluorescent lights greeted me like an old friend. At the reception desk, the receptionist looked up from behind the glass and offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Nurse Valverde. How was your weekend?" I nodded gently and headed down the hallway toward the nursing station. Every footstep echoed on the linoleum floor, and the murmur of conversations, the beeping of monitors, and the rolling of carts surrounded me like a chaotic chorus. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to feel the mixture of vertigo and calm bubbling inside me. At the counter, I picked up a folder of pending medical records. It was time to be Nurse Ana, taking vitals, reviewing results, coordinating transfusions. But deep down, I knew it was also time to be Mariana Alvarado's daughter. Someone with a past to reconstruct, with names, dates, and memories waiting to emerge. As I searched for my gloves and thermometer, I noticed my uniform seemed to fit differently. Not only was the fabric wrinkled, but it also bore the weight of a recovered lineage. I found a free corner on the desk and unfolded the diary to the first few pages, where the opening lines spoke of a lavender summer. A fellow nurse approached. "Is everything okay, Ana? You seem thoughtful." I looked at her and sighed with a suppressed smile. "More than fine," I replied. "It's been an eye-opening weekend." She nodded empathetically and continued on her way. As I turned on the monitor at my station, I saw the initials of my next assignment flashing. Patient Progress Lopez, Ward 7. I gently closed the journal and tucked it back into the folder. Beside me, the locket rested peacefully, a reminder that the real story was just beginning. As I calibrated the blood pressure monitor, I remembered my mother's last words. "Do not be afraid, my daughter, for I will always be with you." I felt a lump in my throat, and a warmth spread through my chest. The hum in the room became a distant murmur, and my ears picked up only the thump of my own blood. With a firm step, I stood up to head to room 7. Every breath confirmed an undeniable fact. The trunk, the key, the diary, and the relic had transformed my world. And as I pushed open the door, I knew that on the threshold of each room, beside each patient, also beat the story of a nurse who now carried the legacy of 2 families in her heart. And so, amidst protocols and revelations, my watch began. Every second counted, every heartbeat mattered, and I, transformed into Ana Valverde, Mariana's daughter and protected by the memory of her love, was ready to save lives and rebuild my own. I opened the door to room 7 with a determined stride. Mr. Lopez lay there, a 65-year-old man admitted after an acute myocardial infarction. His forehead was beaded with sweat, and next to the headboard, the oxygen tube emitted a rhythmic sound that marked each breath. I approached the side of the bed, put on my gloves, and took his wrist to monitor his heart rate. "Good morning, Mr. Lopez," I said clearly. "I'm Nurse Valverde. How are you feeling today?" He slowly opened his eyes and gave a half smile. "A little tired, but fine. Thanks to you. I looked at the graph on the monitor. The line was slightly sloping, a sign that the pressure could drop at any moment. I adjusted the norepinephrine infusion pump as directed in the protocol and reviewed the previous night's chart. I noted the dose administered and the hemodynamic response on the progress sheet. As I wrote, my gaze shifted to the locket around my neck, a small reminder that my own story beat alongside each patient. When I looked up, I saw Guillermo appear, striding briskly down the hall. He was dressed in civilian clothes, not in uniform, as if he'd skipped his duties to check on my shift. I greeted him with a discreet nod, and he nodded in response. In that exchange of glances, I realized my professional and personal worlds were merging once again. I finished writing down the vital signs and gently adjusted Mr. Lopez's sheet. I closed the digital notebook and turned around. Mr. Lopez, I'm going to step in and out for a moment to coordinate some blood tests. Don't move, I'll be back soon, I told him. He nodded with a slight gesture of thanks, and as I walked through the door, I ran into Guillermo. Is everything okay? He asked, his voice thick with concern. Yes, I replied, controlling my feeling of vertigo. Mr. Lopez is stable, but we need to monitor his low blood pressure. I'm going to order a complete blood count and electrolytes. He stopped next to me and looked at the monitor screen. Let me know if you need help, he offered. I felt flooded with a comforting warmth. That, I know you're here, implicit in his presence, reminded me that I wasn't alone. I nodded. Could you please notify the lab, so they can prepare the urgent analysis? I'll notify radiology. As I dialed the internal number, I thought of my mother's last words. I'll always be with you. That ethereal voice materialized into Guillermo, ready to take care of me while I took care of others. After hanging up, I grabbed my cell phone to document the medical order and send it through the system. The confirmation beep told me everything had been recorded. I took a deep breath, adjusting the rear-view mirror on my uniform for a quick makeover. In that fleeting gesture, I saw the mixture of fatigue and determination reflected on my face. The nurse who loved her job and the daughter who reconstructed her past every second. Suddenly, the intercom crackled with a code orange from the ER. Code orange, pleural effusion, room 12. A new challenge, a new patient requiring my immediate action. I looked at Guillermo and uttered the word that sealed my resolve. I'm going to the code. I'll be back in a moment. He nodded and added, Take care, Ana. Emergency kit in hand, I hurried down the corridor. Each step resonated like a drumbeat. I knew that, just as I had saved a man who was now my father, I was about to confront him with another uncertain outcome. Adrenaline surged through my veins again, and as I turned the corner into room 12, I felt the pulse of my own blood guiding me. And so, with my heart torn between duty and the story yet to be revealed, I closed the threshold of this page to enter a new episode of urgency and revelation. The light from my wristband flashlight flickered across the green walls of the ICU as I walked down the hallway toward room 12. Code orange had alerted me. Massive pleural effusion, shallow breathing, and risk of respiratory collapse. My emergency kit rested in my right hand. In my left, my pulse was pounding. I knew every second could save or kill the patient. Upon entering, I found a 50-year-old woman lying in bed with her torso elevated 30 degrees, her shoulders shaking with each inhalation. Her skin had a grayish tint, and the suction tube creaked at regular intervals. Beside her, the attending physician was preparing the needle and the pleural fluid collection bottle. Without wasting a moment, I approached the side of the bed. Mrs. Ramirez, I'm Nurse Valverde, I announced calmly. We're going to relieve that pressure. Are you ready? The patient nodded her chin, gripping the edge of the sheet with trembling hands. I nodded to the doctor, who slid the needle into her chest and began draining the excess fluid. I watched the manometer, which indicated the pressure and the amount of filtration. Each deciliter that flowed out slightly improved her color and breathing pattern. 150 milliliters, and the pressure drops 1 point, I reported, still at 7 centimeters of water. As the liquid cleared the collection tube, I felt the cold of the antique key in the inside pocket of my uniform. A fleeting memory transported me to Valle Verde, to the dusty attic. I took a deep breath and returned my focus to the present. I had to remain calm to guide the procedure without errors. The patient sighed more deeply and, for the first time in minutes, closed her eyes with relief. The monitor showed a gradual rise in oxygen saturation and an uneven drop in respiratory rate. The drainage exceeded 300 milliliters, and the doctor decided to gently withdraw the needle. "Okay, Anna," he said. "Everything's fine. Cover the area with sterile gauze and a bandage." I took the bandage and gently applied pressure to the puncture site. I cleaned the area with antiseptic solution and carefully applied the compress. I attended to the dresser and the monitor sensor, ensuring the readings remained stable. The patient blinked with relief, and her gaze transported me for a moment to my own reborn life. Just as I had inhaled the fresh air after emerging from the trunk of my story, she was catching her breath. I leaned over her. "You've been very brave," I whispered. "Now let's rest a little, and we'll monitor your vitals." The woman smiled at me gratefully. As I turned to enter the procedure into the system, I noticed Guillermo's figure on the other side of the bulletproof glass. He had arrived without me noticing, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me. His presence gave me strength. I knew he would offer me a word of encouragement at any moment. I left the room and found him there, his jacket a little wrinkled and his face serious. "Everything went well," I commented. "We've drained 340 milliliters, and the patient is stabilized." He nodded, relieved. "You're amazing, Ana." The pang of pride in my chest mingled with the memory of my recent discoveries. The locket, the letters, the diary. I realized that, like this patient, I too was regaining my ability to breathe deeply, to face the day without the pressure of a hidden past. "Thank you," I replied. "But I must return to the nursing station now. There are still patients waiting." I took her hand gently. "After shift, we'll go have a quiet dinner. I need to tell you what happened at Grandma Martinez's house." Her eyes shone with curiosity and tenderness. "Whenever you want," he said. "I'll be here." I retraced my steps, and every corridor I crossed felt the echo of the human heartbeat. Emergencies, urgent care, rescues. But I also felt the echo of my own blood, resonating with renewed strength. The pager indicated an urgent transfusion alert in the hematology ward. I sighed determinedly and picked up my briefcase. "See you later, Dad," I murmured through the glass. He raised his hand in a gesture I knew would accompany me every step of the way. I crossed the door and, with a steady hand, faced the next mission. As the door closed behind me, I felt that this page had also come to a close. I had saved another life, but my true reconstruction had only just begun. And so, with the murmur of the corridors and the throb of my own certainties, I closed this scene, ready to face life's next call. The pager vibrated insistently under my palm as I left the ICU for the hematology department. The hallway stretched out before me, lit by a constant flow of medical personnel and stretchers creaking against the linoleum. With each step, I felt professional responsibility and the echo of my own story intertwined. The trunk, the letters, the medallion, and now an urgent transfusion code demanding my full attention. Upon arriving at the hematology suite, the smell of anticoagulants and IVs mingled with the metallic aroma of the nearby lab. The technician on the phone was waiting for me next to a cart full of blood bags labeled with barcodes and expiration dates. I took a deep breath. "Ana Valverde, urgent transfusion for patient Gonzalez, room 21, I announced, as he nodded and handed me the clipboard with the instructions. I checked the blood type. O negative with rare antigens, the very type only a few hospitals stock. I marked the correct bags, checked the database for compatibility, and scanned the codes. The technician prepared the infusion, and I approached the patient's venous access site. A 48-year-old man admitted for gastrointestinal bleeding. In room 21, Mr. Gonzalez lay pale, leaning against the headboard, conscious but weak, his eyes fixed on me with a glimmer of hope. Gently, I disinfected the catheter area and connected the line. "Good morning, Mr. Gonzalez. I'm Nurse Valverde. We're going to start the transfusion slowly to monitor for possible reactions," I said calmly. "If you notice any heat, itching, or any discomfort, Let me know immediately. He nodded weakly and offered me a half smile. I started the flow at 20% of the recommended rate and watched the drip with precision. As I checked the readings on the digital screen, I noticed a slight tremor in my hands, a mixture of physical exhaustion and the excitement of this new bond. The man I'd saved in the ER was also the father I'd just rediscovered. I forced myself to concentrate. Every drop counted. Halfway through the infusion, the monitor alerted me to a slight rise in the patient's body temperature. I hurried to check the parameters. Temperature 37.8 degrees Celsius, I reported. I'll slow down and we'll check every 5 minutes. I adjusted my speed, noticing how Mr. Gonzalez's pulse stabilized and his color took on warmer nuances. Meanwhile, I mentally reviewed the pending conversation with Guillermo. I wanted to tell him what I had discovered about Mariana's diary, the photograph of his sister, and the promise of the house sealed by my grandmother's spirit. Hanging up the empty bag, I carefully removed the line and applied a sterile dressing. I recorded the exact amount transfused and the absence of adverse reactions on his digital record. Mr. Gonzalez thanked me in a husky voice. "Thank you, Nurse Valverde. I feel much better." I smiled and handed him a towel to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "Get some rest and avoid getting up without help. I'll be back in an hour for another assessment." I left the room and found Guillermo leaning against the hallway. His eyes shone with pride and curiosity. "How did it go?" he asked when he saw me. "The transfusion was a success," I replied, dropping the briefcase. "Nothing out of the ordinary." He took a step toward me and reached up to gently brush my cheek. "You're incredible, Ana. Every life you save reinforces the certainty that you were born to do this." The warmth of his words pierced my chest. I grabbed his hand. "And you were born to be with me," I whispered. Then I looked at my watch. Half a shift was passing, and there was still a neurological examination and the report for Dr. Serrano to go. "I have to get back," I said, with a slight sense of regret. "But this afternoon, without fail, we'll meet to go over everything." He nodded, pleased. "I'll wait for you in the break room. Take a break. You deserve it." With that promise, I stepped back into the midst of the murmur of monitors and the drone of medical conversations. Each step resonated with a double beat, that of duty and that of the heart reconstructing its story. I closed the door behind me, aware that on that day, like so many others, every second counted. But I also knew that, beyond saving other people's lives, I was saving my own. And as the corridor narrowed before me, I knew I was closing the scene to open the next. The encounter with Guillermo and the final discovery of Mariana's testimony, in a story yet to be written. I finished writing down the last line of the transfusion record and, with a sigh of relief, picked up my briefcase. The digital screen reflected Mr. Gonzalez's stable progress, and my fingers reviewed each piece of information to make sure I hadn't missed anything. As I put down the pen, I felt the weight of the locket hidden under the gown, a constant reminder of my own history that pulsed with each patient. I put the report back in the folder and prepared to return to the nursing station. As I crossed the hall, the echo of my footsteps resonated on the linoleum. A colleague stopped me next to the medication cart. "Are you going to take your break?" he asked quietly. "There's hot coffee and snacks in the break room." I looked at my watch. There were barely 20 minutes left until the guard changeover, and after several hours without a break, my mind was crying out for a moment of respite. I nodded gratefully. "Yes, I'm on my way. Thanks." I left my briefcase by the station and walked briskly toward the break room. As I opened the door, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped me, and there was Guillermo, sitting by the round table, with 2 steaming cups and an expectant look on his face. He stood up when he saw me enter and offered me one of the chairs. "I thought you might want a moment of quiet," he said, handing me the cup. "How did it go?" I sat down and closed my eyes for a moment as I inhaled the bitter coffee steam. When I opened them, I looked at him with a half smile. "It went well," I replied. Mr. Gonzalez responded perfectly to the transfusion. There were no reactions, and the values are within expectations. Guillermo nodded pleased and took a sip of his own coffee. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed very distant from that makeshift refuge, where the murmur was limited to a few breaths and the clinking of spoons. "I'm glad," he replied, "and I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about what you found in Valle Verde." I took a deep breath and placed the cup on the table, resting my palms against the cold surface. "The locket, the black and white photo stopped me in my tracks," I began. "Two young women, my mother and her sister. I didn't know there was an aunt, much less that there was a place where their memories rest. The journal mentions a cemetery by the stream, with a moss-covered headstone." I saw his eyes light up with interest as he leaned forward. "I found the town's death registry," he explained. "There's a grave dated May 12, 1978, with the name Isabel Alvarado. She seems to be your mother's sister. We could go this weekend to look for her." The thought of wandering through that ancient cemetery quickened my pulse. Imagining the tombstone, the withered flowers, the history etched in stone stirred a deep emotion within me. "We will," I assured her. "I need to see the face of that grave, to read its name with my own eyes." Guillermo smiled tenderly and took out his phone to open a document. A digital copy of Valle Verde's civil registry, with coordinates and notes from the local priest. "If we talk to the priest and tell him your story, he'll let us access the ossuary where they keep the old photographs," he suggested. "We'll have to go early tomorrow morning." I looked up at the clock on the wall. There were only 5 minutes left until I returned to my shift. A mixture of excitement and urgency coursed through me. "I have to go back," I said regretfully. "Stroke code in neurology." He nodded and extended his hand to me. I squeezed it tightly, as if wanting to hold on to that moment of complicity for a second. "Be careful," he whispered. Briefcase in hand, I crossed the break room, and as I stepped out, the intercom crackled with the urgent announcement. "Code ECV Neurology, Floor 2. My heartbeat mingled with the alarm, and with a steady pulse, I started running down the hallway. And so, at the crossroads of professional urgency and family secrets, this scene ends. I ran down the neurology corridor, my footsteps echoing only with the distant beeping of the monitors. The CVD code warning indicated a possible stroke. Every second counted to minimize neurological damage. Upon entering room 3, I found the patient, a 72-year-old man, with half his face drooping and his right arm lying inert on the white sheet. His eyes, half open, seemed to beg for help, but he didn't have the strength to utter a word. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Nurse Valverde," I announced calmly, my hand resting on his wrist. "Let's make sure everything is under control." The resident physician held the portable Doppler ultrasound, looking to detect compromised cerebral blood flow. I asked the assistant to prepare the peripheral line to administer alteplase according to the thrombolysis protocol. Every step had to be precise, confirming the time of symptom onset, checking weight, and adjusting the dose. The assistant, aware of the urgency, handed me the pre-filled syringe. Puncture time, 1:47 p.m. I entered on the digital chart, gently pressing on the catheter. Calculated dose, 0.9 milligrams per kilogram. Initial bolus infusion. With steady hands, I injected the 10% bolus of the total dose and programmed the infusion pump to deliver the remainder over the next 60 minutes. The monitor showed stable hemodynamic values. The next challenge would be to monitor the patient for bleeding complications or neurological improvement. As the 4 began to flow, I returned my attention to Mr. Martinez's face. His steady gaze, filled with confusion but also hope, reminded me of every story of success I'd shared during my years as a nurse. Sliding my free hand across his forehead, I added, "I know it's difficult, but we'll do everything we can to help you regain function. You're not alone." Outside, behind the glass, I saw Guillermo, frowning, waiting for the result. In an almost imperceptible gesture, he gave a thumbs-up sign. I smiled briefly and listened to the low murmur of the room. The tickle of the non-invasive ventilation, the murmur of the nasal cannula, the regular beat of the infusion pump. The nurse on duty asked me about the next vital signs check. In 15 minutes, blood pressure and Glasgow cuff every 5 minutes to assess the neurological scale, I replied, while writing down the time on the touchscreen. I checked that the defibrillator was accessible and that the emergency cart was stocked. Every thoughtful detail could make a difference. The tension in the air was thick, like a taut thread hanging over our efforts. As I stepped back, I felt my pulse quicken, not just from the urgency, but from the persistent thump of my own revelations. The locket tapped lightly against my gown with each deep breath. I thought of my mother's letters, the objects rescued from the trunk, the story I was now piecing together. Each patient I helped became a reflection of my own quest. To heal, to understand, to move on. A high-pitched beep announced the end of the bolus and the start of the slow infusion. I adjusted the screen to display the administered dose curve and prepared for close monitoring. From the half-open door, Guillermo calmly entered, carrying 2 glasses of cold water. He handed them to me. "Just to disconnect for a second, Ana," he said in a low voice. "You've done an impeccable job." I took one of the glasses and sipped slowly, letting the coolness soothe the tingling on my lips. He looked at me tenderly and, leaning in, whispered, "Do you think we can review the journal together this afternoon?" The sound of the drip sinking into its holder and the murmur of the machines answered for him. Every heartbeat here was a step toward recovery, just as every word in the journal was a step toward my own healing. I nodded, despite the weight of responsibility still weighing on my shoulders. "We will," I replied with determination. "First, let's make sure Mr. Martinez is stabilized. Tomorrow will be another day to travel to the cemetery and honor the one who rests beneath the moss." Guillermo smiled and gently squeezed my shoulder. I turned back to the patient, adjusted his head position to facilitate the infusion, and checked the pump flow one last time. In the piercing silence of the room, each breath was a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of the bonds that unite us. With a steady pulse and clear eyes, I knew this page was closing with a promise, to save a mind and, at the same time, to restore a legacy. And as the infusion continued its slow drip, I prepared for the outcome that still awaited after the next watch. The monitor's soft alarm signaled the change in rhythm. The slow infusion had ended without incident, and Mr. Martinez's blood pressure was stable. I took a deep breath as I removed the cannula with the same gentleness with which I had administered the alteplase bolus. I cleaned the puncture site, applied a sterile gauze pad, and noted the exact end time on the digital record. 2:56 p.m. After checking the hemodynamic values for the last time, I sat up and adjusted the infusion pump to administer maintenance 0.9% saline. The patient, still somewhat vacant-eyed, followed my gestures attentively and managed a weak smile. "Good work, Nurse Valverde," he whispered hoarsely. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I felt a flutter in my chest. His words reflected the gratitude I felt every time I saved a life. A reminder that the effort was worth it. I nodded humbly. As I was putting the briefcase next to the emergency cart, the resident doctor approached. "Ana, excellent handling. We haven't seen any complications so far," he said. "Ready for the guard report?" "I'll have it ready right away," I replied, picking up the tablet where I was supposed to complete the official report. "I just need to review the medical history and add the exact dosage based on body weight." The resident said goodbye with a nod of respect, and I sat in an armchair next to the nursing station. My fingers quickly typed. Start thrombolysis, 1:47 p.m. Dose, 0.9 milligrams per kilogram, 10% bolus, 90% infusion at 1 milligram per minute. No adverse events. Each word was a fragment of logic and precision, an antidote to the uncertainty of emergencies. Once the report was finished, I signed it and sent it to Dr. Serrano's mailbox. While I waited for confirmation, my gaze fell on the journal cover I discreetly left on the filing cabinet. Guillermo, who had quietly returned, was carrying 2 cups of green tea and approached gently. "Here, so you can relax," he said, handing me one of the cups. "They asked for the full report, and I thought maybe you could use something milder." I smiled and held the cup in both hands, letting the warm steam soothe my tense shoulders. With my first sip, I tasted the light, comforting bitterness I loved so much. "Thanks," I whispered. "I sent it just now." He leaned on the desk and turned the screen toward me, showing me the confirmation email. "Report received. No additional comments. Everything's in order," she commented, Do you think we can review Mariana's diary entries together now? I remembered the piece of sheet used as a bookmark on the page that talked about the cemetery by the stream. My heart leaped. Isabel Alvarado's tombstone, covered in moss, waiting to be read with my own eyes. I'd love to, I replied. But the next shift changeover is about to begin, and I still have to stop by neurology to leave monitoring instructions. He nodded in understanding and slid the journal to the edge of my chair. I'll accompany you, he offered. Give me your orders first, and then we'll sit down. I put the cup away and picked up my jacket. As I headed to neurology room 3, I felt the steady throb of the locket against my sternum. Every step down the hallway reminded me that my life was now divided into 2 missions: saving bodies and reconstructing memories. After leaving the instructions, I finally stopped by the break room. Guillermo caught up with me, his journal open to the indicated page. I sat down and took a deep breath, ready to immerse myself in my mother's final confessions. As I read the first paragraph, the words came alive around me. The murmur of a brook, the crunch of damp earth beneath my boots, the echo of tragedy, and a promise of redemption. When I looked up to share the fragment with him, the light in the hallway dimmed with the onset of a sudden storm. Raindrops soaked the window pane, like a whisper from the sky anticipating the end of this day and the beginning of the final journey to the cemetery. And so, with the diary in my hands and my heart burning, I knew that the end of this page was not a goodbye, but the threshold of a search that would require courage, tears, and the strength of a love that had endured beyond death. By dawn the next day, the rain had eased, but the sky was still covered in gray clouds that drifted lazily over the village. The crunch of soaked leaves and the murmur of the nearby stream accompanied our first steps as we got out of my car. Guillermo firmly closed the umbrella, and I, protecting the medallion under my jacket, inhaled the cold air, hungry for stories. My mother's last words still echoed in my memory. The cemetery by the stream, my Aunt Isabel's mossy grave, the promise to discover everything. We walked along the path leading to the cemetery, where a wrought iron gate, corroded by moisture, stood on 2 stone pillars. On one, some barely legible chiseled letters: Valle Verde Cemetery. We touched the gate with a slight creak. Then, we pushed carefully, and the gate gave way, revealing a path covered in damp earth and fallen leaves. Each footstep was an echo of strange footsteps that had walked this place on sunny days and moonlit nights. To the right, a fountain of withered flowers offered its remains to the wind. To the left, a worm-eaten wooden bench invited contemplation. But our steps led us deeper, to the edge of the stream, where several humble gravestones formed a semicircle. Grass grew wild between the niches, and moss covered the epitaphs, erasing names and dates. With Mariana's diary in hand, I located a note. At the water's edge, look for the inscription from 1978. My heart leaped. I knelt beside the central grave and brushed aside the green leaves with a glove, revealing the carved letters. Beneath a thick layer of moss, I made out, Isabel Alvarado, May 12, 1978. Little flower that illuminated our lives. An arrow in the journal pointed to the grave. Read his epitaph aloud to feel his presence. I took a deep breath, let a tear fall, and said, Little flower that illuminated our lives. The air seemed to stand still. A bird's song pierced the silence, and for a moment, the gray light of dawn became clear, like a wink from the sky. I felt my mother beside me, whispering a barely audible note. You did well, my daughter. Guillermo placed his hand on my shoulder and offered me a white rose picked from the cemetery fountain. I took it gently and let it rest on the tombstone, next to the embroidery on my handkerchief and the locket. Each petal seemed to regain the color lost over the years. The soft scent evoked the lavender field my mother had described. Isabel was your aunt, Guillermo whispered. Mariana's younger sister. She died before she turned 15. Your family history contains both pain and beauty. I nodded, my gaze focused on the epitaph. Mariana's promise had been fulfilled. To know the name of the man who shared blood with her. The man who paved the way for me to exist, even without having seen me grow up. I closed my eyes, imagining 2 girls running together under the oak tree, laughter floating in the wind, games hidden behind the lavender. I consulted the map sketch again, where a circle marked another point of interest, stone pit. Beside the graves, I laid the journal on a smooth stone and pointed the direction to Guillermo. "I think it's time to find the well," I said decisively. "It's near the 100-year-old oak tree." We got up and followed a small path that descended a few meters to a clearing where an old, truncated fig tree offered shade. Beneath it, a stone well covered with a cracked slab. When we removed the stone, we discovered a dark hollow. My pulse quickened. The promise of another discovery throbbed in my veins. "Your mother wrote that she kept a final letter for you in the well," I commented, my voice cracking. "If you make it this far, open the wooden chest by the water." Guillermo turned on his cell phone's flashlight and illuminated the inside of the well. At the back, a rectangular cedar box, varnished but worn, was held up by rusty chains. Carefully, we lowered a rope and tied it to the handle of the chest. We pulled, and the chest slowly emerged. We placed it on the flat cover of the well, covered in lichen and roots. I placed the antique key in the chest's metal lock, turned it slowly, and heard the click of it open. An earthy aroma and a murmur of the past enveloped us. I lifted the lid, and inside, next to one last rolled-up letter, I found a small book with fine leather covers, embossed with the initials M.A. It was the diary from the summer of 1977, when Mariana anticipated Isabel's arrival and prepared for her departure. But the letter, the last missive, glimmered with a green silk ribbon. I untied it with trembling hands and unrolled the yellowish paper. "My daughter, if you read this at your aunt's grave, you will know that my love for you and for her transcends death. I have kept here my forgiveness, my dreams, and the hope that you will one day find peace. Read these lines, listen to the echo of our voices, and stay with me in your heart." The diary, the letter, the locket, the tomb, and the well all converged in a perfect moment. The past revealed, the promise fulfilled, and the beginning of a shared future. And as the morning mist lifted, I knew that the end of this page opened the final door to the heart of my story, where love and family were forever reconciled. The wood of the chest creaked under the touch of the antique key, and as I lifted the lid, a sigh of stale air escaped from inside, mingling with the morning dew that still clung to the well. Inside, the rolled-up letter and the small leather book seemed to vibrate with a latent echo, as if they held a forgotten heartbeat. With trembling hands, I held my cell phone light to the back of the letter and untied the silk ribbon, releasing a piece of paper finely perfumed with the earthy scent of dampness. "My dear child, if you are reading this, it is because you have crossed the threshold of my last refuge. Perhaps the water of the stream still murmurs your surname, or the wind through the branches of the oak repeats my name. Fear not, my daughter. Every word I write here is woven with the thread of my memory and the warmth of my love. Before I surrendered you to the world and the protection of those who raised you, I dreamed of the day our paths would cross. Today, from your aunt's grave and the silence of this well, I send you my forgiveness and my hope. Forgiveness because my fear forced me to leave. Hope because I know destiny has brought us together to rebuild what time has broken. In this book, you'll find my most intimate thoughts. Confessions as a child, promises as a mother, scenes from a home filled with laughter and pain. Read each page with an open heart, and you'll see my fingerprints in every word, my sighs in every comma. There, you'll also find a drawing of the house by the stream, and on the last page, a blank space. It's your page, where you can write your own story. I embrace you with every letter. I protect you with every line. No matter how far away my body is now, my spirit flies beside you, whispering to you that you will always, always be my beloved Ana. With all my love and faith, Mariana. Reading the signature, a lump of emotion tightened in my throat. The murmur of the brook seemed to intensify, as if responding with soft applause. Guillermo, his gaze filled with reverence, leaned forward to hold my shoulder. Together, we held the letter between us, feeling Mariana's invisible heartbeat pulsing through every fiber of the paper. The small, delicately varnished leather book lay to one side. Unwinding the strands of cord and opening the cover, we discovered yellowed pages filled with neat handwriting. Each entry tore a piece of my mother's life, Her childhood under the oak tree, her first encounter with the loss of her own sister, the shock of discovering my existence in her womb. Illustrations of wild violets and the ivory blanket alternated with marginal notes. Remember to blow once on this line to feel my breath, or here flowed the last tear I shed for you. As we turned the pages, I felt like each word formed a bridge between my present and his past. When I reached the last page, I found a blank space, framed with drawn laurels. It was just as I had written, my page. The page where I could capture my voice. Silently, I looked at Guillermo, and he offered me a pen that he took out of his pocket. I took a breath and wrote, with firm strokes, "Here begins my own story, woven from the roots you gave me. You are my mother, my guide, and my strength. I carry you in every heartbeat and honor you with every step. Ana." I closed the book and carefully placed both the letter and the notebook back in the chest. I felt the weight of the past blend with the lightness of a possible future. Above, the sun finally broke through the clouds, and its reflection in the water created golden glimmers where darkness had once reigned. It was as if the world celebrated that act of reconciliation. Guillermo put his arm around my shoulder, and together we gazed at the cemetery in the distance, feeling the whisper of the tombstones and the intact presence of those who rest there. "We fulfilled her last wish," he said softly. "Now it's up to us to honor her." I nodded wordlessly, aware that the journey didn't end at the well. There was still the return to daily reality, where patience and responsibilities awaited. But there was also the promise of sharing that hidden story, of building new chapters that would integrate Mariana's legacy with my life in the hospital and with our newly discovered bond. We picked up the casket, gently secured it, and left the cemetery. The gate closed behind us with a gentle creak, as if the echo of reconciliation had given it rest. In the car, the silence was complicit in our astonishment and the newly created intimacy. As we drove back, I felt the leather notebook against my lap, a talisman of memory and hope. As I re-entered the hospital, the fluorescent lights bathed me in their cold glow. Yet a serene fire burned within me, fueled by revelations and my mother's invisible embrace. Guillermo took my hand before we said goodbye. "When you're ready, we'll read the newspaper together under the light in your office," he offered with a smile. I smiled, and in that gesture I knew that, after each shift and each emergency, I would return to the place where my roots lie. The chest would rest on my desk, among my work equipment, reminding me that Mariana's story and mine form a single narrative. And so, with a full heart and my gaze fixed on the future, I knew that this page closed the prologue to a rebirth. The rest of the book of my life waited to be written, day by day, with the ink of hope and the courage of a love that has conquered time. Upon returning to the hospital, we parked the car next to the emergency room entrance. The smell of disinfectant and reheated coffee greeted me like an old acquaintance, but something had changed inside me. I carried the cedar chest, the key, and Mariana's diary, relics that were now part of my daily routine. Guillermo helped me carry the chest, and we carefully placed it on my desk. Each object seemed to radiate a gentle, almost living pulse, which made the silence of the office vibrate. "Do you want to leave it here, or would you rather secure it before the guard?" he asked, moving some files aside to make room for me. I looked at him and felt a thrill of excitement and responsibility. "I think this will be fine," I replied. "I just want a moment to read a passage before I change." Guillermo smiled and pulled a chair across from the desk. I turned on the lamp and placed the locket, the withered rose, and the leather notebook on the wood. I opened the chest, took out the book, and let it rest on my lap. With still trembling hands, I turned to the page where Mariana recounted the day she knew I existed. She described the fear she felt upon hearing my first heartbeat, the warmth of my tiny hands covered by her fingers, and the promise to protect me from any adversity. For a moment, I felt small again, wrapped in that old love that I now understood in all its magnitude. As I read softly, I noticed the echo of the monitors coming through the wall, a pulse of life that reminded me of my duty. Guillermo watched me silently, respectfully, as if he didn't want to interrupt the intimate contact with my mother. Turning the page, I saw Mariana's instructions to leave the diary on her childhood nightstand. the drawing of the rocking chair by the oak tree, and a list of songs she hummed to calm her anxiety. One of them, marked with a star, was the lullaby my grandmother used to sing. "Sleep, sleep, my girl." A lump in my throat prevented me from continuing for several seconds. "Thank you for coming here with me," I whispered, still staring at the text. "I feel like I can finally hear your voice." Guillermo took my hand and squeezed it tenderly. "Your mother lives on in these pages," he said. "And now in your smile, too." A light knock on the door announced the start of shift change. A nurse was calling to let me know that the tracking code for a stable patient needed to be entered immediately. I gently closed the book and placed it back in the chest, covering it with the embroidered handkerchief. I placed the key on the cover, next to the locket, and took a deep breath. "I have to go," I said. "The ICU patient needs arterial blood gas monitoring, and Dr. Serrano is expecting the report before rounds." He nodded without losing his calm. "Go easy. After your watch, we'll review the journal together." I nodded and picked up my briefcase, feeling the familiar weight of the metal. As I entered the hallway, the murmur of my colleagues surrounded me. The nurse's uniform left the seclusion of the office behind, but the locket still rested on my heart. Each beat now carried the echo of a lineage that had remained hidden beneath layers of silence. Upon arriving at the procedure room, I was informed that the patient in bed 9 was experiencing mild respiratory distress. I prepared the arterial blood gas test, calibrated the machine, and focused my attention on the needle. Every second of blood pressure, every drop of blood analyzed, was an act of salvation as important as the journey I had made those hours before. As I poured the sample into the analyzer, my mind replayed Mariana's final words. "Never doubt your strength." A high-pitched beep indicated that the equipment had processed the results. I noted the values and relayed the information to the resident, who adjusted the ventilator automatically. I sighed with relief. Another stable patient, another safe heartbeat. As I sat up, the intercom sounded with an urgent warning. "Code red, stopping in room B." My pulse quickened. I pulled out my briefcase, put on my gloves, and hurried down the corridor. My uniform became armor, my heart a metronome. As I ran, I felt my mother's pulse whispering in my ear. "Go ahead, my daughter, for your story and mine beat in your strength." With a firm step, I crossed the door to room B and took up position next to the resuscitation team. The emergency light flashed red, and I knew this new call would be another link in the bridge between my legacy and my destiny. The door to room B closed behind me with a soft creak, and the red flash of the alarm bathed the faces of every team member in urgency. The patient, a 48-year-old man with a history of hypertension and coronary artery disease, lay on the stretcher, pulseless and with blue lips. The senior physician led the way, and at the end of the stretcher, the defibrillator registered the absence of a rhythm. Without thinking, I positioned myself and began chest compressions, keeping time with the precision of years of practice. 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted aloud, feeling the internal heartbeat that connected my personal history with each push. The monitor emitted a monotonous beep, and the echo of my hands against my sternum resounded like a battle drum. To the rhythm of the compression, I calibrated the force to reach 5 centimeters of depth and maintain effective recovery. Beside me, a nurse prepared the mask and the ambo bag, while another attached the defibrillator paddles. "Charge to 200 joules," I ordered firmly. The current passed through the chest with a faint flash, and after the sharp click, we saw the first sign on the monitor, a spasmodic heartbeat. The patient's body convulsed slightly, and he exhaled a deep gasp. I immediately switched to assisted ventilation, gently inhaling air while my team administered a bolus of adrenaline. Every second was crucial. The same heartbeat that had saved my biological father now resonated in that stranger. I sighed with relief when my pulse returned to a steady state, and I made a mental note of the exact time. The head physician nodded respectfully and ordered the norepinephrine infusion to continue to ensure proper perfusion. As I adjusted the pump, I noticed Guillermo's gaze behind the bulletproof glass. His eyes shone with restrained pride. He gave me a thumbs up, reminding me that my strength came not only from training, but from the legacy of love my mother had entrusted to me. As I removed the mask, the patient opened his eyes in confusion and touched my hand with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he murmured weakly. I stroked his forehead and smiled. "You fought very well. Rest for a moment. I'll make sure everything remains stable." As I replaced my gloves, my own heartbeat throbbed in sync with his, 2 lives united by a moment of absolute devotion. The team removed the defibrillator and covered the patient with a clean sheet. I picked up my briefcase and prepared to complete the resuscitation report. But first, I slipped my hand into the inside pocket of my gown, where the antique key and a small lock of hair my mother had hidden in the locket lay. I felt the cold against my palm, an intimate reminder that, in saving other stories, I was weaving my own with every gesture. The monitor beeped regularly, and the patient's pulse remained at 45 beats per minute. I sent the report to the digital system, describing each parameter. CPR initiated at 5:23 p.m., defibrillation at 200 J, 1 milligram adrenaline bolus administered, pulse returned at 5:27 p.m., patient sedated and ventilated with stable parameters. Each word sealed the success of that procedure and, at the same time, the triumph of a legacy that spanned generations. As I left the room, I took a deep breath, leaving behind the murmur of heartbeats and electronic beeps. In the hallway, Guillermo was waiting for me, journal in hand and 2 cups of tea. He smiled at me and, leaning toward me, whispered, "Today you saved 2 lives, a patient's and ours, by strengthening the connection with your mother." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the cafeteria door, where I would continue reading those pages that now nourish my present. With a firm step, I crossed the threshold and knew that this scene closed a chapter of urgency and revelation, giving way to the calm necessary to honor, in silence, the love that guided me from the beginning. After leaving room B, my pulse continued to race, but in the hallway, I found Guillermo waiting for me with 2 steaming, comforting cups of herbal tea. I stopped in front of him, my briefcase still slung over my shoulder, and took the cup he handed me. The warmth of the liquid calmed me instantly. "Well done," he whispered to me. "Now it's your turn for a little while." I nodded and offered her a tired smile. I took a deep breath before crossing the corridor together, which led us to a small, secluded lounge, where the benches were made of wood and the windows overlooked an interior courtyard planted with jasmine. There, on a circular table, rested the cedar chest, wrapped in the embroidered handkerchief and accompanied by the locket and the antique key. I lit the lamp and set the cups aside. As the steam rose in thin columns, I carefully opened the chest and removed the leather journal. That guardian of words and secrets seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. Guillermo sat across from me, rested his chin in his hands, and gave me an unhurried look. "Where are we staying?" he asked softly. I reached for the last page I'd read and held it with my thumb. The account of Mariana's departure, the delivery of my medallion, and the photo of my aunt. I could almost hear her whispering through each line. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, feeling the weight of generations connected by a thread of ink. "Here," I finally said. "On this page, it talks about the lullaby Grandma used to sing with a trembling voice, 'Sleep, sleep, my baby.' And then it describes the feeling of holding me in her arms for the first time. With a trembling voice, I began to read aloud. That night, in the makeshift crib by the oak tree, I felt your breath as faint as a petal's sigh. My heart beat out of control, and every time I closed my eyes, I feared I'd forget your scent." As the words flowed, the only things in the room were my voice and the distant murmur of the monitors filtering through a crack. Guillermo took my hand as he finished the paragraph and carefully placed his other hand on the locket resting next to me. "She was talking about you," he whispered. "She painted you with the tenderness of her memories." I let out a soft sigh and turned the page. There, Mariana described a storm. "The rain lashed the tiles and the wind lashed at my feet, yet your tears were my light. I sang for you in the midst of the thunder, because I wanted you to know you weren't alone." The story resonated in my heart like an echo of my own nights on call, singing lullabies in the solitude of the break room. "It moves me to imagine her in that old house under the storm," I murmured. "Shall we get to where she talks about the letter she left me in the well?" He nodded, and we turned to the handwritten index. There, next to entry 27, appeared the note, "The Well of Forgiveness," and below it, a tiny sketch. I leaned over the drawing and reviewed the symbols, a treble clef drawn in the margin, music to soothe the soul, and at the end, the word "wait for me." "She was waiting for you there, on every line," William commented, his voice heavy. "Now that you've answered, you can bring her back into the world." I felt a chill. That "wait for me" was more than a word. It was a promise of reunion. I carefully closed the diary and placed it next to the embroidered handkerchief. I took the antique key and caressed it lovingly, as if by rubbing its blackened surface I could sense Mariana's pulse. "I'm going back to Green Valley tomorrow," I said with determination. "I want to check if there are any more hidden letters, maybe in the 100-year-old oak tree or the rocking chair on the porch." Guillermo smiled at me with the affection that only a newly discovered father can show. "I'll accompany you," he offered without hesitation. "And then, when you're ready, we'll continue reading the diary until the end." I sat up and picked up my empty cup. Deep down, the tea tasted of hope. Standing in front of the casket, I felt the watchful gaze of my biological father and the loving presence of my absent mother. In that moment, I understood that, even though life continued to demand every second of my time in the hospital, there was a sacred space where I could take refuge and listen to those voices that had given birth to me. We placed the glasses in the sink and collected our coats. As we left the break room, the murmur of the guard continued. Codes, measurements, hurried footsteps. But I felt different. I carried in my heart the certainty of an unbroken lineage, a legacy of love and sacrifice that now belonged to my history. With a firm step, I crossed the threshold and, looking back, saw the open chest on the table. There lay the pages I'd read, and those still waiting their turn. Each one contained a piece of who I had been, who I was, and who I was yet to be. And as the buzzing of the emergency room claimed me, I knew that, by closing the scene, I was opening a new path. A path where, amidst guards and rescues, I would find the echo of my mother and the protective embrace of my father, in every written word and in every shared heartbeat. I left the break room, the echo of the newspaper echoing in my mind, and resolutely slipped back on my gown. The pager insisted. Pediatric code, respiratory event, room 5. I crossed the hall to the children's unit, where the bright colors of the walls contrasted with the seriousness of the situation. A 9-year-old girl named Daniela was coughing between sobs and showing a chest tightness that indicated a severe asthma attack. Her eyes, filled with fear, searched for her mother's face, whose monitor had briefly been disconnected to allow her to breathe. Without hesitation, I knelt beside her and offered her a bronchodilator inhalation mask. "Let's help you breathe better, honey. Inhale slowly and exhale when you can." As she inhaled the medicinal steam, my hands prepared a corticosteroid bolus according to protocol. To her mother, sitting next to the bed with tears in her eyes, I whispered, "You'll see improvement in a few minutes. We're here to take care of you." Next, I adjusted the infusion pump and administered the medication. The monitor indicated a change in oxygen saturation, which rose from 82% to 90% in a matter of 6 minutes. The girl stopped trembling, and on the second attempt, her breathing became regular. I stroked her forehead. "Very good, Daniela. You did magnificently." Her mother hugged me gratefully and, after wiping away a few tears of relief, murmured a heartfelt, "Thank you, Nurse Valverde." As I recorded the exact dosage and time in the digital log, I felt the weight of the locket in my pocket, an intimate reminder of the fragility of life and the strength I've inherited. As I sat up, I glimpsed Guillermo peering through the glass door. In his civilian uniform, he was holding our travel bag for Valle Verde. His knowing smile gave me a moment of warmth amid the hospital's tension. I nodded, as if he knew that this moment of reading and personal discovery was as essential to me as any medical procedure. The patient's monitor reached 95%, and the pediatric team confirmed they could slowly remove the mask and keep her under observation. I said goodbye with a brief gesture. "I'll take note of her progress and be right back." Minutes later, I dropped the report into Dr. Serrano's inbox and took a deep breath in the hallway. The buzzing of monitors, the murmur of conversations, the hurried footsteps of nurses and orderlies composed a constant symphony of life and urgency. I took the embroidered handkerchief out of the box next to my briefcase and pressed it against my chest. Its soft texture reminded me of my mother's presence at every stage of this day. The next call was less dramatic, but just as urgent. Blood sugar check, diabetic patient in room 10. I crossed the ICU for seniors and found Mr. Hernandez, his skin sweaty and his eyes cloudy. I pricked my thumb, collected a drop of blood, and observed a reading of 48 milligrams per deciliter on the glucometer. I prepared a bolus of dextrose and administered the correction intravenously, ensuring his consciousness improved rapidly. His faculties returned within seconds. He looked at me gratefully and exclaimed, "What a scare!" I smiled, aware that every technically flawless performance also rebuilt the trust of those who depend on us. When I finished, I dropped the test strip into the waste tray and returned my gloves to the cart. For a moment, I rested my gaze on the break room door, where the locked safe awaited. I promised myself, I'll resume my journal there when I can. Every emergency, every treatment, and every recovered heartbeat were parallel chapters of the same story. That of those who trust my hands, and that of a daughter who discovers her own lineage through letters and heirlooms. A new announcement confirmed my change of guard. My shift was coming to an end. I crossed the reception desk, my gown covered in antiseptic and medication stains, feeling the weight of fatigue and the pulse of adrenaline still pounding in my blood. In front of the uniform closet, I slid the hanger to change into my uniform. On the hanger hung a clean apron and a light coat, perfect for tomorrow's trip. Before leaving, I paused for a second in front of the wall of photos of honored former members and colleagues. I took the antique key out of my pocket and discreetly touched the locket, an intimate gesture, almost a silent prayer. I assumed the portraits of those professionals were looking at me with admiration that I could only share with my own mother and biological father. As I walked through the front door, the night breeze welcomed me. The damp smell of asphalt, the distant murmur of the city, and the promise of a home where, at last, my roots rest. Guillermo was waiting for me with my bag and a couple of thermoses, ready to share a light dinner before resuming my journal by the light of the office lamp. As he walked me to the car, I closed my eyes for a moment and let the memories of Valle Verde blend with those of that hospital. I knew that every page I read, every patient saved, and every heartbeat restored brought me closer to the conclusion of this story. That of a nurse who learned to heal her own heart while saving the hearts of others. The last beep of the monitor faded in the ER as I placed the progress sheet on the digital tray. With a sigh, I put the pen next to my briefcase and removed my gloves, feeling the ink of the report still vibrating beneath my fingers. Outside, the hallway remained silent, dimly lit by fluorescent lights flickering on energy-saving mode. That moment of calm contrasted with the intensity of the past hour. Code red, pediatric code, and Mr. Hernandez's critical blood glucose had followed one another without respite. As I rotated the defibrillation tower back into place, I felt the antique key and locket rest in my inside pocket, reminding me of the journey I'd undertaken just 24 hours earlier. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed deeply, letting the weight of my mother's story and the heartbeat of each patient blend in my chest. I walked out into the hallway and ran into the neurology resident, who nodded respectfully when he saw me. "Good work, Valverde. It's time for you to rest," he said to me before heading off to the patrol with Dr. Serrano. I returned his look gratefully and walked toward the nursing station, where the emergency cart was being collected. On the prescription table, a yellow reminder stood out. On duty 6 to 6 p.m. I had logged more than 12 hours without stopping. Still, a gleam of determination lit my face. The Valle Verde route awaited me at dawn next morning, and I needed to close this episode with my professionalism intact. Upon reaching the staff exit, I opened the revolving door and was greeted by the cool evening breeze. There, next to the hospital fence, was Guillermo leaning against the car, his travel bag in the open trunk. His expression was a mixture of pride and concern as he saw me appear, still with traces of antiseptic on my gown. "Ready?" he asked softly, letting the lapels of his coat fall. "I've prepared the thermoses with broth and some fresh water." I handed him my briefcase and removed my robe, revealing the comfortable t-shirt I was wearing underneath. The night air ruffled my hair, as if trying to rid me of my tiredness. I smiled. Smarter than ever, I replied. But first, a quick break. I need a coffee with milk. Guillermo put my bag away and offered his hand to escort me to the staff cafeteria, just a few steps away. The sunset-darkened windows cast amber reflections, and as we stepped inside, the smell of roasted coffee and still-warm croissants filled the space. We ordered 2 large cups, and while he collected our change, I took refuge in one of the vinyl armchairs. With the first sip of coffee, I felt the bitterness mix with the warmth in my throat. I took the embroidered handkerchief out of my bag and passed it over my lips, as if that gesture would anchor me to the memory of my mother. Guillermo returned with the cups and sat down opposite me unhurried. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his gaze intent. I placed the cup on the table and, in a soft voice, I replied, "Tired but happy. Every patient reminds me why I chose this profession, and every page of Mariana's diary reminds me who I am." He nodded and slid his hand over mine. The murmur of the cafeteria turned into a welcoming whisper, barely interrupted by the clatter of spoons. "We'll leave at dawn tomorrow," he said. I checked the forecast. Clear skies until noon. We can spend a little time visiting the rocking chair, and then go back and read the last pages of the journal in the natural light. A smile spread across my face. The plan was coming to life with the same certainty that beats through my veins. I looked back at my coffee, remembering the last line I'd written in my notebook. "Here begins my own story." That blank space awaited my words, promising me a future woven with the past and hope. I put away the empty cup and stood up, ready to grab my overnight bag. Outside, night had completely fallen, and the parking lot's streetlights illuminated the cobblestone road. The cedar chest rested on the back seat, protected by blankets and the whisper of its pages. Before getting in the car, I paused for a moment and closed my eyes. I felt the echo of my mother singing in the midst of the storm on my skin, and when I opened them, I saw Guillermo's face, illuminated by the reflection in the windshield. "Come on," he whispered. I got in, started the engine, and as I accelerated, I knew this page was ending with a murmur of the asphalt and the accelerated pulse of the night, giving way to a tomorrow where every kilometer would bring us closer to the truth that remained to be written. Dawn gently broke as, after gathering our thermoses and loading the trunk into the trunk, we set off for Valle Verde. The cold morning air tinged the fallen leaves with frost, and the country road opened up before us between dew-drenched fields. In the passenger seat, I held the old-fashioned key delicately, as if pressing it against my palm would transmit strength to my entire body. Beside me, Guillermo turned on the car's heater and, without looking at me, offered me a knowing smile. He knew that in a few hours we would discover fragments of life that would have remained hidden forever. As we reached the threshold of the Alvarado family's old house, the front door gave way with a pitiful creak, and the silence of the portico enveloped us. We walked over to the wooden rocking chair, already rickety with age, and I stopped in front of it. The diary mentioned a secret drawer under the seat, locked by a small, almost invisible metal latch. With still shaking hands, I inserted the key into the slot and, as I turned it, heard a soft click that broke the stillness. I lifted the lid of the compartment and found, carefully folded, several yellowed papers. Unpublished letters my mother had written in the solitude of her nights. Each one bore dates after my adoption, as if she had continued to see me in dreams and continued to tell me about her love from a distance. I took out the first one, dated 6 months after my departure. "My beloved Ana, I know you didn't receive these words, but as I write them, I feel your presence by the oak tree. Every line brings me closer to you." My voice cracks as I read, and Guillermo takes my arm tenderly. I continued with the second. "This year I collected lavender, so that when you smell this scent, you will remember the flowers that bloomed on the morning of your birth. I sent you a bouquet in that sealed envelope that, to this day, no one has opened." A shudder ran through me. At the bottom of the drawer was also a small cloth bag. When I slipped it through my fingers, it released a handful of dried flowers scented with a sweet, unmistakable fragrance. The lavender rustled softly, reclaiming its place in my memory. Suddenly, an object popped out from under the letters. An envelope lined with white lace, marked with my initials. I opened it and found a never-before-seen photograph of my mother holding me in her arms, in profile, with the light from the window illuminating our faces. On the back, her handwriting. My reflection. I wept helplessly, clinging to the moment frozen on paper. Guillermo leaned down next to me and gently offered me a handkerchief. I accepted it, wiped my tears, and dropped it onto the rocking chair. Then I glanced at the folder he'd left beside me, an old tape recorder. She also wanted to leave you her voice, he explained. I inserted the cassettes, adjusted the volume. And, for the first time, I heard Mariana's lullaby, her sweet, trembling voice echoing in the dimness of the room. The song, "Sleep, Sleep My Child," flowed with each note, drawing a bridge between my unconscious childhood and this fateful morning. My hands gripped the back of the rocking chair, and I felt the past and present reconcile with each beat. When the tape ended, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had found not only her written words, but also her voice, beating in a dusty cassette. Watching Mariana in that maternal gesture gave me a peace I never imagined I'd ever feel. We carefully packed our belongings and moved to the ancient oak tree where my mother had spent so many hours inventing stories for her daughters. Under its shade, I opened the journal to the last blank page, took a pen, and, with my heart overflowing with gratitude, wrote, "Here ends the prologue of my life, and begins the shared novel we will build together. Thank you, Mother, for your infinite love." Guillermo hugged me and, as we parted, whispered, "The rest of the day is yours." I nodded with a smile, knowing that this page closed the chapter of discovery and opened the one of true reunion, where every next step will be guided by the voice and legacy of the one who gave me life. When we closed the lid of the chest, the murmur of the brook once again stood as a silent witness to our pact. The sun had already risen high enough to gild the lintels of the old Alvarado house, and the air smelled of dry earth and old memories. Guillermo leaned on the threshold, offering me his arm as we crossed the hall together. "There's still a lot to see inside," he told me, with a mixture of excitement and respect. "Are you up for it?" I nodded, pressing the antique key into my palm, and we entered the foyer. The wooden floor creaked beneath our footsteps, releasing small clouds of dust that danced in the beams of light. I noticed that the walls had retained their now-cracked oak moldings, and that a shelf by the staircase held 3 framed photographs. One of Mariana as a child, smiling by the oak tree, another of my Aunt Isabel cuddling a rag doll, and a third of the 2 of them holding hands, standing in front of this very door. I stopped in front of them, moistened a handkerchief, and ran my finger over the fogged glass. "I didn't know you had this photo," I whispered. "Mom was already taking care of her little sister here." Guillermo placed his hand on my shoulder. "I'll get the caretaker," he offered. "He'll show us inside." In less than a minute, the figure of Don Rafael appeared, the man who had kept the property open for years. His threadbare jacket and tilted cap indicated that it had rained a lot since he last came here. With a humble smile, he beckoned us to follow him. We climbed the stairs in silence, and with each step I remembered the echo of my own footsteps as a child, wandering through someone else's house. The first-floor hallway was divided into 3 doors. My biological parents' bedroom, Isabel's playroom, and the attic we'd already accessed. The first door creaked open, revealing a large bedroom with a worn 4-poster bed, a carved wardrobe, and a dressing table with an oval mirror corroded by humidity. Don Rafael brought a flashlight closer and pointed at the dressing table. "Here, miss. They found these little things when we cleaned up a couple of winters ago." On the nightstand, piled up on a cracked ceramic plate, lay several tiny objects. A wooden teether, a fake pearl brooch, and a coloring book with torn pages and scribbles in purple ink. I bent down and carefully picked it up. "It was your childhood book," I told Guillermo. "This is where I started collecting my first stories." I flipped through the torn pages, admiring the drawings of flowers and houses, and on the back I found a dedication. "To my Ana, who will paint this world with color." I felt a lump in my throat. "We could photograph it and then keep it in an album," William suggested. I carefully put the notebook back in my bag, and we headed toward the playroom. There, The floor was covered with worn carpets, and in one corner stood a small trunk. The lock was still intact. The same key turned in the deadbolt, unleashing the metallic click. Inside, I found dolls in faded dresses, scraps of embroidered fabric, and a miniature diary tied with brown string. When I opened it, there were the pages Mariana had written as if the world belonged to them alone. Tales of adventures in the garden, confessions of nighttime fears, and a promise to always protect me. I read a fragment in a low voice. When you close your eyes, Ana, look towards the border of the wild violets. There I will wait for you with a new tale. Don Rafael moved, closed the door behind him, and went out into the hallway, leaving us alone. When I turned my gaze to Guillermo, I saw his moist eyes. It's like he left a little piece of his soul for us to find, she whispered. I nodded, feeling the weight of melancholy mix with gratitude. We went down to the foyer, and before leaving, I paused by the large, cracked mirror. I looked at myself, the reflection of the nurse in a white coat and jeans intertwined with the image of the daughter who had sought her roots. I took out the locket, opened it, and placed the photograph next to my heart. Thank you, I murmured, as if Mariana could hear me. As I turned the key in the lock to descend for the last time, I knew this chapter ended here, but that there were still pages to be written in each room we would visit tomorrow. Because, like your journal, my story ends not with what we find, but with what we will do with each discovery. And as the door closed behind us, the echo of the creaking in the wood sealed the end of this page and the promise of new revelations in the next chapter. As we descended the stairs, each wooden step creaked under our weight, releasing clouds of dust that floated in shafts of light. The foyer came alive again in my mind. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the cracked mirror, the scent of dried lavender still drifting through the cracks in the floor. I held the small notebook of illustrations and my mother's unpublished letters, feeling that each discovery reinforced a bridge between yesterday and today. Guillermo walked silently beside me, as if respecting the sacred space those relics had opened. As we turned toward the front door, we stopped beside an old coat rack where several wide-brimmed hats hung, memories of those who had lived here before. And I noticed a wardrobe near the entrance still holding a red velvet coat with a satin lining. I tugged on the hanger, and when I took it down, 2 inside pockets appeared. In one, I found a handkerchief embroidered with faded initials. In the other, an envelope sealed with red wax and my mother's handwriting. It must be something very special, I whispered, as I tore open the flap. Inside lay a Polaroid photograph. My young mother, standing in front of the 100-year-old oak tree, holding the hand of a little girl who wasn't me. It was another sister, with an unfamiliar face and lively eyes. On the back, the brief note, "For your first birthday, with all my love." A lump formed in my throat. Another sister? I asked, and Guillermo nodded. It seems Mariana had more family than we thought. I carefully put the Polaroid away and placed it in my blank journal, like a bookmark. Together, we walked out into the backyard, where the last of the morning mist still clung to the pages. We walked toward a tool shed, a wooden shed with small windows and slightly crooked doors. Mariana had mentioned in her journal that she hid her childhood album there, a packet of envelopes containing postcards and clippings. Resolutely, I pushed open the door and we entered the dusty space. Piles of boxes and shelves barely held the weight of memory. Jars of buttons, watch lenses, rolls of film exposed to time. At the back, on a low shelf, we found a gray cardboard box without a lid, stuffed with envelopes labeled by year. 1975, 1976, 1977. And at the end, one marked 1979, your extended family. I took it with trembling hands and, upon opening the envelope, slid out several sepia photographs. Portraits of uncles, cousins, and in one corner, a postcard of a coastal town with notes on the back. Summer by the sea, waiting to meet you. As we looked through the images, the sun was already conquering the garden and the bird song filled the air. I realized that, beyond the letters and the diary, that shed held the extended history of my lineage. Places, faces, voices that yearned to be acknowledged. We have weeks of work to do. I smiled at Guillermo. He put his arm around my shoulder and said tenderly, "Today you've rewritten the lives of 3 generations. Imagine what we'll do with the memories that still await. Emerging from the box was an old, leather-bound photo album. Opening it, I discovered pages upon pages of family images. My teenage mother holding her newborn sister, my grandfather wearing a straw hat, and my grandmother with a locket around her neck, identical to the one I wore. Each photograph was a testament to a past that came alive before my eyes. I carefully closed the album and, as I placed it next to the trunk, I felt the echo of my family's voices resonate in the air. As I turned the car key, I knew this page closed a chapter of discoveries, but also that the following pages still awaited the stories yet to be pieced together. As the engine started, we left the Alvarado house behind, certain that when we returned tomorrow, an archive of moments would await us to transform into living memories. The return route wound through hills covered in evening mist. The chest, the album, and the Polaroid occupied the back seat, wrapped in soft blankets. In the front seat, Guillermo drove in silence, aware that that day we had unearthed centuries of stories among dusty boxes and forgotten notebooks. I, staring at the reflection of the streetlights in the windshield, replayed each discovery in my mind. The letters my mother never sent, the lullaby recorded on tape, and the family albums that emerged from the shed. Suddenly, I felt the urge to understand the last secret left to reveal. The blank space in the diary, where I had to capture my own voice. I shook the lavender sachet, and its scent brought back childhood memories I'd never experienced, but that now felt like my own. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, I asked Guillermo, "Do you think my mother would have wanted me to continue this diary?" He looked away and, after a second of silence, replied, "I'm sure I would have filled it with your dreams and the stories to come." I smiled, comforted by her voice, and felt closer to her than ever. The clock struck 9 o'clock at night when I arrived in the city, and the hospital lights shone like a beacon in the distance. As I parked, I grabbed my overnight bag and briefcase, feeling like I was carrying two worlds, that of the emergency room and that of recovered roots. "I'll review the paper in my office early tomorrow," I announced. "But first I need to rest." Guillermo nodded and helped me unload the chest. As I walked through the front door, the murmur of the hallway surrounded me. Nurses changing shifts, the distant beep of a monitor, the faint aroma of coffee and antiseptic. Everything seemed the same, but I knew it wasn't. Every hallway, every room, had taken on a new hue since discovering Mariana's legacy. In the room we shared that night, a small room with 2 beds and a built-in wardrobe, I left the chest next to the desk. I turned on the nightlight and carefully removed the locket and the antique key. The dim light bathed the desk, revealing the thickness of the unread pages. I sat on the edge of the bed, closed my eyes, and softly recited my mother's lullaby. "Sleep, sleep, my child, the wind will guard your dreams." A deep calm enveloped me. When I opened my eyes again, I rested my head on the pillow and felt the diary grow before me like a paper bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. Without realizing it, sleep overcame me with the promise of new pages to write. When I woke up, the clock read 5 o'clock. Dawn was breaking behind the curtains, dyeing the room pink. I sat up, my heart pounding with anticipation. The echo of my responsibilities called to me. At 6 o'clock the nursing rounds began, and at 7 o'clock I had to submit the on-call report to Dr. Serrano. But before I put on my gown, my mind returned to the blank space in the diary, eager to fill it with my own writing. Guillermo, still half asleep, tilted his head and murmured, "Ready to continue the story?" I nodded, giving a sleepy smile, and stood up. In the dimness of the room, I grabbed my journal and a pen, determined to write the first paragraph of my life, in honor of the one who gave me the voice and the courage to face each heartbeat. I woke up with the first ray of sunlight filtering through the curtains, and before sitting up, I took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of lavender still floating in the room. The clock read 5 o'clock, and my mind still held the echo of Mariana's lullaby ringing in my ears. I stretched out under the sheets, picked up the journal and pen resting on the nightstand, and became aware of the weight of the blank pages awaiting my voice. I stood resolutely and walked to the desk. With each step, I remembered the trip to Valle Verde. The key turning in ancient locks, the creaking of the oak, the birds singing at dawn. Gently, I placed the locket next to the notebook and, before sitting down, scented my hands with the dried lavender. Then, I placed the tip of the pen on the final page and wrote, "Today I wake up with the strength of my roots traversing time. I am Ana Valverde, an emergency room nurse and the daughter of a mother who searched for me with every heartbeat of her silence. This diary, a legacy of love, becomes the chronicle of my life and a tribute to those who gave me the voice to write it. Here begins the story of my days, where each step between medical corridors and recovered pages brings me closer to the truth that runs through my veins." As I wrote the last words, I felt a thrill of completeness. I tenderly closed the journal, placed it in the chest, and headed for the uniform closet. Each button fastening the gown reminded me of my mother's embrace in letters and ribbons, and my father's protective hand with every step we took together. In the hallway, the white fluorescent light illuminated the parked emergency carts. I crossed the reception desk, smiling and greeting the colleagues who found me extending their shift. I glanced at the on-call panel. My name was listed under the regular schedule, but my heart was beating on a different schedule, marked by the ink in that diary. I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed to the ICU, where I waited for the arterial blood gas check scheduled for 6. The room was quiet. As I approached the patient in bed 15, a middle-aged man regaining strength after surgery, I noticed a hint of restless sleep on his eyelids. With expert hands, I took samples, monitored him, and whispered words of encouragement. "Breathe, because today the sun has risen for you too." As I recorded the results, my mind wandered to those recovered pages. The lavender flowers, the sealed well, and the family album. The intercom buzzed with an unexpected warning. An unusual cultural code, a call for blood donations for a child with a compatible blood type. The name echoed. A little boy taken from the pediatric emergency room, his life hanging on my ability. With the determination I'd wrung from Mariana's heart, I ran to prepare the blood bag. My heart sank when I saw the boy, his eyes wide and full of fear, holding his mother's hand. I offered him a smile and said, "You are not alone. Your blood beats alongside that of this anonymous donor, and today you will overcome the storm." I began the slow transfusion, monitored his tolerance, and noticed his skin warming. It was then that I realized that every page written in the diary translated into every heartbeat saved, and that personal and professional history danced in unison. Upon returning to the office, the casket was resting on the table. I sat down, opened the last page, and glimpsed the words I had written at dawn. A sigh enveloped me. I had completed not only the initial paragraph, but also the symbolic act of uniting my life with hers. I closed my pen and saw, through the crack in the window, the sun rise over the hospital, heralding a new day full of emergencies, discoveries, and above all, stories yet to be written. With each vital sign and testimony, I reaffirm my commitment to honor this legacy of love in every gesture and heartbeat. Okay. The morning moved forward at a relentless pace when, after leaving the closed newspaper in my office and hanging up my lab coat, I went out into the hallway exchanging greetings with my colleagues. The clock read 6:20, only 10 minutes into my shift, and already the hallway was bustling with the comings and goings of nurses, technicians, and orderlies. The screen display announced code Delta, waiting room A, and my pulse quickened as I imagined the gravity within. I entered the waiting room and found a distraught family. A pale, sweaty 16-year-old boy who had suffered an anaphylactic reaction to a wasp sting. Beside him, his mother held his hand firmly, her fingers gripping the crisp paper of an allergy checklist, and his father held a phone, searching for an urgent bus from the neighboring town. I took a deep breath and introduced myself in a reassuring voice. "I'm Nurse Valverde. We're going to stabilize him right away." As I hurried the technician to bring the intramuscular adrenaline, I explained to the mother that every second was crucial to stop the edema. Determinedly, I prepared the syringe and administered the dose. I noticed a slight tremor in my hands, a mix of adrenaline and excitement, as I watched the boy's face stop swelling and regain color. After a couple of deep breaths, his mother let out a sob of relief, and he gave me a weak smile. Without pausing, I moved on to the next task, monitoring the sedation of an elderly patient admitted for bilateral pneumonia. The monitor was showing saturations fluctuating around 89%, and the infusion pump required dose adjustments. With precision, I changed the administration rates and added a bolus of humidified oxygen through the mask. When I saw his saturation rise to 94%, I took a moment to record the values and review the progress in the system. The hallway then led me to the trauma unit, where an X-ray technician was waiting to transfer a car accident victim. I coordinated the transfer with mobile life support, monitoring, a patent line, and adequate analgesia. As I helped slide the stretcher onto the ramp, I remembered the promise I made to myself in Valverde to honor every heartbeat, and felt my pulse connect with those clinical cogs that, together, kept so many lives afloat. Between one emergency and another, the intercom summoned me to the control room, where I was to inform Dr. Serrano about a patient with possible sepsis. I walked in with a firm stride and, standing before him, explained the case. A history of urinary tract infection, a fever of 39 degrees Celsius, tachycardia, and leukocytosis. The doctor nodded, prescribed new antibiotics, and asked me to closely monitor my urine output. Upon leaving, I wrote down each instruction in clear handwriting and stamped the digital report. The clock struck 8. More than an hour and a half had passed. My fingers moved with the same fluidity with which the ink filled my mother's diary. I thought about the perfect alignment between the written pages and these clinical scenes. Both spoke of rescues, past or present, emerging in the same gesture, that of saving. Before heading to the cafeteria for a coffee and rereading the last pages of the journal together, I paused in front of the wall of photos of distinguished alumni. There, among faces I'll never know, I imagined my mother and aunt, smiling like those Polaroids from Valverde, looking at me with pride. I took a deep breath and regained the pulse of urgency. A new code green announced electrolyte monitoring in the ICU. With my briefcase on my shoulder, I crossed the hall, knowing that, with every clinical challenge and every spare heartbeat, I carried with me the echo of a legacy that had begun on a blank page and now blossomed, page by page, in my own story. The midday sun beat down harshly on the windows of the infirmary when, after jotting down the final orders for the neurology patient, I took a brief moment to contemplate the open chest on my desk. The locket and the antique key seemed to be looking at me knowingly, as if inviting me to pick up where I'd left off. Amid the intense activity of the hospital, monitor beeps, hurried footsteps, and simultaneous conversations, that corner of calm became my personal refuge. With a cup of green tea in my hand, swiftly warmed by the ambient heat, I opened the journal again to the page where Mariana described the afternoons by the stream, when the evening light tinged the reeds with gold. Her words delicately recounted the murmur of the water and the sigh of the wind in the poplar leaves. That description enveloped me so much that, for a moment, my ears caught a faint trace of a distant splash, and my mind evoked the freshness of that morning in Valverde. I glanced up the hallway, where a colleague was giving me a thumbs up. Dr. Serrano needed the progress report on the surgical patient before the 1 o'clock round. I carefully closed the journal, put it in the safe, and, as I stood up to return to my routine, I felt the renewed weight of my own story, woven with emergencies and familiar discoveries. In room 14, Mr. Ortega waited for me, his eyes half closed. His breathing still sounded somewhat hoarse after the planned intubation. I checked the sedative curve and adjusted the infusion pump according to protocol. Midazolam at 2 milligrams per hour, fentanyl at 25 micrograms per hour. As I leaned over him to check the symmetry of his pupils, I remembered Mariana referring to the symmetry of the reflection in a stream, that feeling of containment that only water can soothe. The patient breathed more regularly, and I recorded the values on the tablet. As I was leaving, a call from dispatch alerted me. Code Bravo, attention in pediatrics. My heart sank. I left my briefcase next to the station and ran down the corridor, following the emergency lights. Upon arriving, I saw a 5-year-old boy with a very high fever and febrile seizures. His mother, clutching his shirt, was sobbing in the corner. Without hesitation, I knelt beside the little boy, held his head, and asked the technician to prepare a rectal diazepam infusion. Every second was crucial to stop the seizure and prevent neurological damage. Once the sedative was administered and the child was stabilized, he regained consciousness with heavy eyelids. I gave him a strawberry-flavored pacifier to soothe his dry mouth and explained in a gentle voice that everything had passed. His mother hugged me and said, with gratitude and relief, "You gave me back my son." Those words resonated in my chest like an echo of everything I had experienced. Saving other people's lives was also saving pieces of my family. Back in the office, the clock read 1:05 p.m. The scent of green tea still lingered on my fingers. I felt the pulse of each emergency intertwine with the pulse I'd inherited from my mother. I opened the chest, took out the diary, and paused on a new fragment. Mariana described her biological father's arrival on the porch with a bouquet of violets, the same flower that now perfumed my pockets after that morning in the cemetery. A high-pitched beep alerted me to the announcement from the hematology ward. I needed to supervise the last bag of plasma for an urgent transplant. I put away the journal and, without removing the locket from my neck, headed to coordinate the transfusion. As I adjusted the pump speed and confirmed the blood type, I couldn't help but think about the drops of ink and plasma that, together, comprised a single story of restored lives. When I finished, I returned to the office with a steady hand. The chest awaited me, its pages still unread. I paused before it, took a breath, and thought about the weight of my mother's voice, the embrace of my newly discovered father, and the heartbeat of each person I had saved. In that moment, I knew that, even though the urgency was relentless, I would find the strength to continue reading and writing, because each page I read nourished my heart, and each diagnosis I addressed strengthened my faith in the love that unites us. The intercom rang again. "Begin guard change in 5 minutes." I firmly closed the journal, locked it, and put on my lab coat. As I crossed the door once more, I knew that afternoon, like so many others, the halls and passages of a lost story would intertwine to give meaning to my own life. The upstairs hallway bustled with activity as, after closing the safe in my office, I returned wearing my nursing shoes and a tight-fitting gown. Evening light streamed through the large windows, creating bands of shadow and light on the linoleum floor. At 5:45 p.m., the intercom sounded. "Code Epsilon, cardiac arrest in operating room 3. I put my pen down next to my journal and, shouldering my briefcase, hurried down the hill past automatic doors and flashing lights. Upon arrival, a surgeon was pressing on the sternum of a patient still open on the operating table. My pulse rising, I positioned myself opposite the anesthesia machine. "Come on," 5 strong compressions followed by ventilation, the chief ordered. I began CPR with precision. The pulse of my hands against the throbbing flesh trembled with an echo of all the heartbeats I had ever restored. The defibrillator read charge complete. Shock at 200 J synchronized. As I pressed the button, I felt the congestion of fear dissipate as the monitor regained a rhythmic beat. Pulse restored. "Let's stabilize him," I informed him, as the surgeon quickly sutured him. I shook the bandage off my gloves and noted the exact time on the digital display. 5:52 p.m. Every second counted, and in that brief triumph of science and life, I thought of my mother's legacy. She herself had fought fear in the midst of storms, and I had fought death in the midst of operating rooms. The team offered me a gesture of gratitude, and the surgeon exclaimed, "Impressive, Valverde." I smiled briefly, my heart on 2 fronts. A duty fulfilled and the certainty that my personal history nourished my vocation. I put my briefcase back down and ran to the elevator, as shift changeover began at 6 p.m. As I stepped off the elevator on the ground floor, my colleagues greeted me with murmurs of admiration. "You're finally resting. You deserve it." I nodded, overwhelmed by the accumulated tension, but with the strength of someone who has found a purpose beyond herself. Before changing, I stopped by the break room for a glass of cool water. The closed chest on a table stared back at me, and in its silence, I heard Mariana's voice reminding me that each day would bring a new fragment of my identity. I sat for a moment, rested my head in my hand, and exhaled, calm, happy, complete. At 6:15 p.m., already in civilian clothes, I left the hospital and walked toward the car. The evening breeze caressed my face, awakening my senses. Guillermo was waiting for me with a light blanket and the leather journal in hand. "Ready for the last reading?" she asked, unfolding the blanket over the back seat. I nodded and settled in, feeling the weight of the unread pages. Opening the journal, I flipped to the end. The entry Mariana had left for me before leaving, a hopeful epilogue. "Now I leave you my voice forever, Ana. May these pages be your compass and my constant embrace. Take care of your family, your biological one, and the one you chose. May love always guide you beyond these lines." My vision cracked as I read those final words. I closed my eyes and listened, in the whisper of the wind, to the lullaby playing on a dusty cassette. I felt the tears running down my face, and when I opened my eyes, I saw Guillermo hand me a handkerchief. I took his hand and, without letting go, wrote in the margin of the last page, "Thank you, Mother. Your voice accompanies me with every beat. Here your story ends and ours begins." I carefully put the pen away and placed the journal in the chest. In silence, we crossed our fingers over the worn leather, sealing the pact of memory and future. The engine started smoothly, and as the city lights rose before us, I realized that this trip had filled my days with meaning. Beyond saving lives, I had saved my own history. And so, wrapped in the murmur of the engine and the memory of the shared pages, we circled the hospital, knowing that tomorrow, every heartbeat and every word would continue to weave this legacy of love, faith, and hope. The car's engine purred as we started back home, and through the windshield I saw the streetlights illuminating splashes of recent rain, like tiny headlights in a wet asphalt tunnel. Under my light coat, the locket rested against my heart, punctuated by the gentle thumping of each note of my inner lullaby. Beside me, Guillermo turned on the radio and selected a classical music channel. The first strains of a Chopin nocturne filled the cabin with a sense of calm and contemplation. As we glided down the road, I recalled the contrast between the hospital's bright hallways and the dusty corners of the Alvarado house. In just a few hours, I had traveled from saving lives to rescuing memories, from restoring IVs to reconstructing family legacies. I could almost feel the murmur of the Valle Verde stream echoing in my ears, motivating me to never lose the harmony between both worlds. When I arrived at the building where we lived, I parked in front of the entrance and, before leaving, I turned to look at Guillermo. His eyes reflected the same intensity one felt, a quiet pride, the complicity of two people united by an unexpected discovery. "Thank you for being with me through all of this," I whispered as I closed the door. "Without you, this wouldn't have been the same." He smiled and slid a hand down my back, soft and firm. "We're a team," he said. "Now, what do you want to do with what we found?" I lifted the cedar chest and carefully placed it on the living room table. The warm light from the lamp hung above us, creating an oval of intimacy. I took out the antique key and turned it slowly to open the lid. The locket, the diary, the letters, and the photographs were revealed like jewels from a treasure that, until that day, had been hidden from the world. I sat on the sofa next to him, surrounded by pages and objects that narrated two parallel lives, that of a professional dedicated to saving bodies, and that of a daughter who had just discovered her roots. With the diary in my hand, I flipped through the last blank pages. Guillermo handed me a pen. "It's your turn," he encouraged me. "Fill that space with what you want to remember and celebrate." I took a deep breath, and placing it on the paper, I wrote, "Today I am fully Ana Valverde, the nurse who holds cold hands on the brink of death, and the daughter who embraces ancient words to heal her own heart. From now on, this diary will be the bridge between the past and the future, the witness to our triumphs and lessons learned. Thank you, Mom, for giving me your voice, and thank you, Dad, for introducing me to your love. Together, we will write the rest of our story." When I looked up, I saw the unshed tears in Guillermo's eyes, and I understood that, beyond any medical emergency, this symbolic act united us in an unbreakable way. I closed the journal, and with it, that cycle of discoveries that had taken me from life to memory and back again. We hugged for a long time, feeling the pulse of our breathing synchronize with the soft melody of the radio. Outside, the rain was easing, leaving a blanket of silence dotted with resonant drops. In the refuge of that lamplit room, I knew that the story of my life would no longer be a solitary quest, but a shared narrative, cultivated day by day with the strength of blood and rediscovered love. And so, with the chest closed on the table and the last page written, the door was open to a tomorrow in which every heartbeat, every word and every gesture would carry the echo of 2 generations united forever. The first ray of sunlight of the new day filtered timidly through my office window, tinting the closed pages of the diary and the locket resting on the desk with gold. Outside, the hospital hallway was beginning to fill with life. But in that moment, absolute calm reigned. The echo of the last written letters floated in the air, as if the entire house were breathing in time with my heart. I stood up, gently clasped the lid of the chest, and paused for a moment in front of the wall of photographs I had placed next to the computer. There were the faces of my mother, my aunt, my grandparents, and finally, the portrait of my biological father, looking back at me proudly. With a determined stride, I crossed the office and stopped in front of the uniform closet. Each folded gown now seemed more than a work garment, a symbol of the vocation fueled by the love we receive and the legacy we perpetuate. I selected the official gown, hung it carefully, and pinned my name badge. Ana Valverde, head nurse. I inhaled deeply, sensing the lingering scent of lavender and the murmur of the distant stream, and imagined that, as I crossed the emergency room door, I would carry with me not only a medical emergency kit, but also a treasure trove of memories that would nourish my soul. The day passed between protocols and emergencies, but something had changed. My gaze turned toward each patient not only as a body to be saved, but as a heart beating under the same sky of stories, some wounded, others restored. During a brief break, I took the locket from my inside pocket and opened it in front of a curious colleague. Inside I kept a lock of my biological mother's hair, a silk ribbon, and the bouquet of lavender flowers I collected at the cemetery. She gave me a knowing smile, understanding that, behind every uniform, there is a human being who sometimes travels back in time to rescue their own story. As evening fell, I left the hospital with my bag a little lighter, but my heart full. I headed to the home where I grew up, where my adoptive parents were waiting for me with shining eyes and outstretched hands. I showed them the open casket, handed them the photographs, and read them excerpts from the diary, the same words that had been sealed with the echo of my mother. Their faces lit up with emotion, and the 4 of us hugged. My adoptive mother, my adoptive father, me, and the man who, without knowing it, saved my life on the first night of these revelations. That night, we closed the circle of silence with a simple toast. On the table, we placed the chest, the journal, and a small lit candle, its flame flickering before each photograph. When we called for silence, each of us shared a memory. My adoptive parents spoke of the day they came home from the hospital to sign the adoption agreement. My biological father recalled his first heartbeat upon seeing me wake up, and I recounted the first page I wrote at dawn. In that moment, I understood that family is not a map of genetic coincidences, but a fabric of affection that is strengthened by forgiveness, gratitude, and living memory. The diary ends here, but my story, like the echo of a heartbeat, continues beyond these leather covers. Tomorrow, I will save a life again with precise CPR. In another room, I will administer a serum that will restore a pulse. At the end of my shift, I will open the chest again to find refuge in Mariana's words. Every day, every letter, every gesture will be a tribute to those who came before me, and a promise to those who will come after me. And so, at the intersection of urgency and memory, I know that my vocation and my lineage beat in unison. With the chest locked and the last page written, I close this chapter knowing that the journey never ends. It lives on in every heartbeat I restore, in every story I embrace, and in every new page yet to be written.